Hello, my dear viewers, Bat-Kun here speaking. Do not forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. The anime begins with our hero named Ryo, who awakens peacefully in a cottage located in the middle of nowhere. Upon leaving the cottage, it is shown that he is capable of manipulating water magic and ends up creating a random ring. But before we fully enter the story, we see how this boy ended up arriving in this world. It happens as usual. The Ice Sky God sent him to this world after an accident. There he meets a blonde man with long hair, who mentions that Ryo has died. Ryo then asks if he is a god, but the man replies that he is more of an angel. Since he does not introduce himself by name, Ryo decides to call him Michael. Michael explains that he will reincarnate in a magical world called Pi, where 1 in every 5 people possesses the ability to use magic, and Ryo's magical attribute will be water. He also explains that this world is not like other Ice Sky. Here Ryo can live however he wants, as he has no specific mission to fulfill. Ryo immediately thinks, wow, what an incredible offer. I personally would make this deal. You would make this deal. Then he tells Michael that he would like to have a life of leisure, which means a life in peace, quiet and relaxed, and with many women. Knowing his desire, Michael warns that Ryo will reincarnate in the Hondo forest. There he will have a house and enough food for 2 months, and as if that were not good enough, the cottage will feature a protective barrier, which will prevent monsters from attacking him. This way he will be able to live with total tranquility. Now, exploring this new world, Ryo finds the basic monster manual, in addition to a plant manual. The boy is quite intelligent. If he does not know something about this world, then he needs to research and learn about it. But before starting to study, he decides to practice his magic. He soon realizes that he can only summon cold water, and there is no way he intends to take a bath with freezing water. So he decides to light a bonfire to heat the water. However, clearly, physical skills are not his forte, and he ends up giving up on the idea. At that moment he observes the sun. Since he is a very clever kid, he takes a bucket of water and decides to experiment with ice magic. Using his knowledge of chemistry, he tries to manipulate the molecules along with the oxygen, and thus he manages to create ice, shaping it into a kind of magnifying glass that he uses to concentrate the sunlight and light the fire. At night, very satisfied, Ryo finally manages to take a hot bath. While bathing, he thinks that he misses women. But not only that, he thinks that just as he managed to create ice, he should also be able to create hot water using magic. Even so, for it to be his first day in this world, it was already a great start. The next day, while having breakfast, he notices that Michael left enough food for 2 months. Therefore, if he wants to continue living peacefully, he will need to learn some type of attack magic to leave the woods and hunt some beasts. In the backyard of the cottage, he begins to practice a water ball, managing to create his first spell successfully. The problem is that his attack power is not very large, and it would hardly be enough to kill any creature. Even so, Ryo is optimistic. He can kill a butterfly and eat it. But for larger animals a water ball is not enough, so he decides to try to create a small projectile that travels at high speed. However, when he tries to do this, all he can produce is a simple, weak jet of water. At that moment, he remembers something that Michael had explained. The essence of magic lies in visualization. That is, he needs to clearly imagine what he wants to create and gain experience through practice. Thus, Ryo spends the entire day training, improving little by little. At night, using the process used to create ice, he manages to generate hot water, allowing him to take another beautiful hot bath. The next day, he continues practicing, creating ice in the air through condensation. Afterwards, he tries to use this ice as a form of attack, but let us say that it did not work very well at the beginning. Even so, he does not think about giving up. He spends the entire day training again, gaining more and more experience. When dinner time arrives, he notices a problem. Since he spent the whole day practicing, he forgot to light the bonfire, which is to say, our little hero ended up being hungry. After that, several days pass, and now Ryo is already capable of instantly creating an ice tip, like a small spear. With much more practice and already having some ways to defend himself, he decides that the time has come to test his skills in the forest. As soon as he enters the woods, he begins to explore them. Near a river, he finds a quartz stone and is grateful, because with it, he will be able to light a fire without depending on the light of the sun. The problem is that while exploring the woods, he ends up encountering a lazar boar, a type of monstrous wild boar that immediately sets out to attack him. Ryo panics and becomes paralyzed with fear. However, upon remembering that he has already died once by being run over, he gathers enough courage to dodge the attack. Furthermore, he does not want to die as a virgin in this world as well. The boar charges forward again. This time, Ryo freezes the ground, causing the creature to slip. Then he creates a wall filled with ice spears and thus manages to defeat the monster. Grateful for having come out of that situation alive, at night while consulting the monster manual, he discovers something surprising. That boar was one of the lowest level monsters. Leafing through the book, he sees that dragons are extremely powerful creatures, capable of destroying entire cities without much effort. There is even a note stating that if someone encounters a dragon, the best thing to do is to flee, although it is very likely they will not even be able to escape. Upon turning the page, he discovers that there are also imps, creatures whose origin is unknown. And curiously, there is also a note warning that it is better to pray to never encounter one of them. Thus, Ryo continues his journey through the forest. While exploring, he ends up being attacked by an assassin hound, a massive bird capable of using invisible wind magic. Since Ryo memorized the entire monster manual, he recognizes the creature immediately. While running for his own life, he blocks the bird's attacks using ice walls. He soon realizes that the creature is too fast, so he understands that he will need to face it directly if he wants to survive. Using his intelligence, he pretends to be easy prey, causing the bird to attack without even thinking. At the last moment, Ryo creates a large ice wall, causing the creature to crash violently against it. However, the bird stands up quickly, and while flying over Ryo, it observes him with hatred, because of him it lost one of its eyes. In the end, the enormous bird ends up going away. However, when night arrives, because of the pursuit by the bird, Ryo loses his orientation and cannot find the way back to his cottage, thus ending up at a strange lake, where he is surprised to see that in the middle of the water, there is a headless armor along with a horse that is also headless. In another scene, Ryo continues exploring the forest. During this time, he defeats an enormous serpent and continues experimenting more and more with his magic. With time, he reaches the point of being able to create a hydro jet, a water attack with enough pressure to cut through even a rock. Now much more prepared, he decides to return to the lake where he found the strange headless armor. There he challenges the creature to a sword duel, using his sword made of ice. While fighting it, Ryo wonders why a Dullahan does not appear in the monster manual. He begins to think that perhaps it is not exactly a monster, or perhaps it is something much more advanced. However, he ends up being defeated, and then we discover that it is not the first time he has faced this creature. In fact, every time he fights against the Dullahan, Ryo feels as if he is being trained by it. At a certain moment, the monster shows its sword and creates a water sword, which it soon after freezes and then delivers it to Ryo. This makes Ryo wonder if the Dullahan wants him to learn how to use it, or if it just wanted to show that it knows how to do it better. Excited, he accepts the sword, while the Dullahan returns to the center of the lake. Thus the days pass, until one day an enormous black bird appears before Ryo. He soon realizes that it is the same parakeet, but now it seems to have evolved. The bird begins to attack him, immediately seeking revenge, and Ryo defends himself the best way he can, but the evolution has made the parakeet even more dangerous, being capable even of neutralizing magic with its roar. Cornered, Ryo takes his new sword and manages to pierce the chest of the monster. Upon approaching the wounded creature, he says that he understands the reason why it returned. After all, it was he who blinded one of its eyes. Even if it was not a fair battle, it is natural that it would not accept defeat. Still, Ryo feels that he must thank the creature, as he deduced that it would return to attack him again. It was precisely this thought that made him train and strengthen himself even more. In a way, both evolved to resolve that confrontation. Respecting the pride of the creature, he feels that he must deliver the final blow. Thus, upon withdrawing the sword, the parakeet finally loses its life. When Ryo decides to return to his cottage, he ends up encountering nothing less than an enormous red dragon. Definitely, luck is not on his side, but surprisingly the dragon speaks to him and seems quite excited to realize that Ryo is capable of understanding it. The dragon explains that it had been a long time since he last used his telepathy, so he asks Ryo if he happened to encounter an evolved parakeet around there. Ryo responds that he did and apologizes in advance, as he was the one who killed the creature. Surprisingly, the dragon congratulates him for managing to defeat the creature and comments that what Ryo carries at his waist is something quite uncommon. Ryo then decides to show his sword, and the dragon reveals that it is the sword of the Fairy King. He also says that if the sword was given to Rio, it is probably because the previous owner likes him very much. Taking the opportunity to be conversing with the dragon, Rio decides to ask a few questions. Thus, the two spend a good portion of the day talking. When evening arrives, the dragon hears a roar in the distance and warns Rio that he must leave, as he is being called. Before departing, Rio introduces himself formally and gives thanks for all the answers he received. The dragon replies that it was a pleasure to talk to him and reveals that his name is Luen. As he moves away, he says he hopes the two can meet again someday. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Michael is surprised to discover something about Rio. He possesses a hidden attribute called Eternal Youth. Michael comments that the last time he saw someone with a hidden attribute was with the first woman he reincarnated, and that happened more than 10,000 years ago. Sometime later, Rio finds a vessel stranded on the sand of a beach. Upon investigating the site, he finds several corpses. However, he is relieved to realize that there is still one survivor. In another scene, we see a red-haired man sleeping in Rio's house, while dreaming of the moment the ship ran aground. When he wakes up and gathers his things, he leaves the house. At that moment, Rio appears behind him, which surprises him a bit, since he did not even notice his presence. Furthermore, Rio's clothing seems quite strange. Even so, he decides not to ask about it. So he introduces himself as Abel and thanks Rio for having saved his life. Rio responds that there is no reason for thanks, as he only brought him to his house. He also comments that he is sorry about Abel's companions, since he was the only survivor of the ship. But Abel responds that there is no reason to worry, as the men who were on the vessel were smugglers. At that moment, Abel's stomach rumbles with hunger, and Rio invites him to eat something. During the meal, Abel takes the opportunity to ask why Rio dresses in that manner. Rio explains that he has neither thread nor fabric, and therefore he cannot manufacture better clothes. Abel then thinks that he could simply buy clothes in some city, but soon realizes that perhaps Rio has no money, and hopes he has not offended the man who helped him. However, Rio explains that in that region no one lives and there is no village nearby. Upon understanding this, Abel asks if Rio hunts to survive, and if that small dagger he carries is his weapon. Rio responds that although he uses a knife for some things, he is actually a water magician. This impresses Abel a bit, since in the central provinces, magic is a skill that only about half of the people can use. Rio finds this information quite curious, because according to Michael, only 20% of the population is capable of using magic. Then Abel asks if Rio could take him to the coast, as there is something he wants to check. Rio sees no problem with this, and while they walk, Abel asks if he does not use a magic wand to cast his spells. Rio responds by asking if that is truly necessary. This makes Abel think that he has offended Rio again, because being someone who appears to be so poor, it is obvious that he would not have money to buy a magic wand. So, as a way of apologizing, Abel says that if any problem arises on the way, he can leave everything in his hands. Rio responds that it is not necessary, but Abel insists, saying it is the minimum he can do to repay the help he received. Rio ends up accepting. Sometime later, when they arrive at the edge of the beach, Rio realizes that the bodies that were there have disappeared. He imagines that perhaps the sea took them, or that they became food for the beasts of the region. Abel thanks Rio, because thanks to him he did not have the same fate as his companions. He also asks that Rio stop treating him so formally, as he finds it strange that his savior speaks to him using such formality. Rio explains that he does this because he thinks Abel is older than he is, but if it makes him feel better, then he will start calling him only by his name. Abel thanks him again. After finishing examining the vessel, he regrets not having found what he was looking for. Rio asks what he intends to do now, and Abel responds that it will be to find his companions again and go to the city of Luen. However, he feels that he is too far south for that. Rio responds that he does not know exactly where that city is located, but he believes they will have to travel quite far to the north. After thinking for a moment, Abel asks Rio if he would like to accompany him, since he does not know the region, and a good guide would be of great help. Rio thinks for a moment and replies that if Abel has no problem with departing the following day, then he will be able to accompany him, as he needs to prepare himself beforehand. Abel accepts, excited. When they arrive at the house, Rio says he needs to go out to say goodbye. This leaves Abel somewhat confused, because Rio had said that there was no one living in that region. He imagines that perhaps Rio wants to pay respects to a deceased loved one, or that he is simply insane. Meanwhile, Rio goes to meet the Fairy King and informs him that he will be departing the next day for some time, staying away from the Hondo forest. He went there to express his gratitude, because thanks to the training and guidance of the Fairy King, he has managed to survive until now. To honor the final duel between them, Rio gives his absolute best in this battle. Even so, as always happens, he is unable to defeat the Fairy King. The creature then prepares to depart, while Rio gives thanks for everything he received. But shortly before disappearing, the Fairy King gives him one last gift. Rio is surprised to see that it consists of new clothes. The next day, Rio and Abel begin their journey. Along the way, they encounter a boar, and Abel asks Rio to let him handle the monster. Using a combat technique, Abel defeats the creature quickly. Rio is impressed, as he had never seen that type of technique before. Then Abel explains that these are techniques used by swordsmen, or by people who fight with weapons. After that, they continue walking and end up arriving at a lake, where they observe some lizardmen. The two decide to take a detour to avoid an unnecessary confrontation. However, as they advance, Rio notices that they are being followed. He then warns Abel, stating that he will use his magic to get rid of the pursuers. Abel tries to ask how he intends to do that without using a magic wand, but he is left wide-eyed upon seeing that Rio easily defeats the enemies without needing one. The most impressive part is that he manages to summon 4 ice spears at the same time. Abel asks how he managed to do that, because a friend of his, who is a wind magician, always said that it is only possible to use one spell at a time. Rio responds that he actually has no idea, suggesting that perhaps wind magic works differently from water magic. After that, he simply summons 2 glasses of water. He drinks to hydrate himself, and the two continue the journey. Further ahead, Rio is surprised to see money in that world for the first time. Abel explains that it is a bronze florin from the Nihilite Kingdom, the place where the city of Luen is located. He also mentions that the central provinces have their own currencies, but in the end, everyone calls money by the same name. Rio then asks if the Nihilite Kingdom is part of the central provinces. Abel responds that it is not and explains that it is one of the 3 great nations, along with the Deberi Empire and the Rendeliu Federation. Rio finds the name Deberi a bit strange, as he believes the name of an empire should be something more grand. As they continue advancing, they end up entering the territory of the stone golems. Abel sets out to attack quickly, but soon realizes it is useless, as the golems regenerate with great ease. Then Rio announces that he wants to try a new technique. Suddenly, he summons an enormous, gigantic block of ice, completely crushing the golems. Abel simply cannot believe what he has just seen. After this, Rio finishes eliminating the remaining golems. Some time later, they notice that one of the golems is still alive but cannot move. They conclude that since it is turned on its side, it cannot absorb energy from the ground, which prevents it from regenerating. Even so, the magic stone inside it is quite large, which means a great reward. The problem is that now they need to melt those enormous blocks of ice to retrieve the rest of the magic stones. Further on, the two encounter a giant crocodile that looks like a hippopotamus. Rio decides to nickname it Kokoipo. At that moment, some wyverns appear and go directly to attack the Kokoipo. Rio and Abel watch and wonder which of the creatures will win the fight. Rio asserts that the Kokoipo will certainly win, while Abel believes it is at a disadvantage. But suddenly, the Kokoipo lets out a powerful roar, which completely nullifies the magic of the wyverns, causing them to fall to the ground. When night arrives, Rio comments to Abel that it would have been interesting to fight against the Kokoipo. Abel tells him to stop talking nonsense, but admits that he never imagined that creature would be capable of nullifying magic. He adds that there are traps in dungeons that possess exactly this same effect. Rio cannot believe that dungeons exist in that world and admits that he would love to enter one. Abel then comments that he will likely be excited to know that the only dungeon in the central provinces is located precisely in Lum. Rio asks why Abel did not mention this before, as if he were hiding something from him. But Abel responds that he was not hiding anything. He simply did not know that Rio had an interest in dungeons. Rio begins to tease him, asking if there is anything else he has decided to hide. Joining in the joke, Abel mentions that in Lum there are also dwarves and elves. Dwarves are known for being excellent warriors and blacksmiths, while elves are rare in that region. In Lum, there is only one, since most live in the forests. Thus, the night passes. The next day, while they continue walking, Rio comments to Abel that after crossing that mountain, they will enter human territory. Abel asks how he knows this kind of information, and Rio remembers that it was Luen who told him all of this. Even so, he tells Abel that perhaps it is better not to explain the details, and that he should simply consider that Rio possesses a source of knowledge superior to human understanding. In response, Abel simply accepts this, and the two continue walking. During the trip, they end up encountering a massive griffin, causing both of them to feel an overwhelming terror. Instead of fighting, they throw a piece of meat to the creature, which accepts the food and leaves peacefully. Further ahead, the two agree that it was a good decision not to fight, as they probably would not have survived. Abel comments that it has been centuries since anyone has seen a Kokoipo or a griffin, and that humanity is not capable of facing creatures of that level. This makes him feel that the region is extremely strange. While they walk, Abel recalls the fight between the wyverns and the Kokoipo. However, in that world, that creature is called a behemoth, but Rio continues to call it Kokoipo. Upon remembering the battle, Abel mentions that those wyverns came from the north, and therefore it is very likely they will encounter more of those creatures again. No sooner said than done. Further ahead, they find some wyverns devouring a boar. Abel warns Rio that these creatures are extremely strong enemies, as it usually takes about 20 experienced adventurers to defeat a single wyvern. Rio comments that it would be much easier to face them if they could not fly, so he decides to approach to incapacitate the creatures while Abel eliminates them quickly. Soon after, 2 more wyverns appear, but Rio manages to defeat them with ease. After a while, the two begin to collect the mana crystals. Abel comments that the fight was much easier than he imagined, but that is something to be expected when one is traveling with the hero of the story. At that moment, more wyverns begin to approach, but now the two are much more confident. Some time later, upon reaching the top of the mountains, they realize that perhaps these mountains are the reason why monsters like the behemoth or the griffin do not enter human territory. Now that they have finally reached the summit, the two are happy to be closer to their destination. Therefore, they continue their journey. Rio comments that perhaps it would have been a good idea to continue fighting the wyverns. Abel asks him to stop talking nonsense, but admits that the magic stones were an excellent, unexpected profit. The two begin to wonder exactly where they are, but upon seeing a road ahead, Abel notices something. If that road continues to the west, then it will likely lead to the village of Kailati. But that would also mean that those mountains are something that is currently unknown. Before he can finish his sentence, Rio interrupts, saying that he is dying to rest in a comfortable bed. While they walk, Abel comments that in Kailati there is an excellent dish that he highly recommends. This makes Rio even more excited. Some time later, as night falls, they arrive at a tavern. There, Abel comments that the best thing now is for Rio to register with the Adventurers Guild. The guild card functions as identification, and with it, any village or nation will permit his entry. He reminds Rio that when they arrived at that place, he had to intervene for him, paying a silver coin so they would let him in. Rio then looks at him suspiciously and jokes, asking if he might be a criminal who paid to turn him into a slave. Abel asks him not to joke about that sort of thing, but Rio continues teasing, saying that Abel is a knight in shining armor, and apologizes for having offended his honor. Abel says that Rio is truly hopeless and explains that the guild also has other advantages. In addition to functioning as identification, the guild buys magic stones and monster materials for a good price. After all, these materials only have practical utility for alchemists. Rio is surprised to discover that alchemy also exists in that world. At that moment, their plates of food are served. To an even greater surprise, Rio realizes that the dish is curry. He begins to think that in reincarnation stories, curry is generally a dish that the hero only obtains after a great deal of effort. Abel notices that Rio seems pensive and asks if everything is alright. Rio apologizes, saying that he was merely daydreaming. When he tastes the food, he is completely marveled, and then begins to eat as if he were starving to death. He finishes the plate quickly and requests another one immediately. The next day, while they walk, Rio returns to teasing Abel, asking what other things he was still hiding. He jokes by asking if Abel also happens to like sweets. But this time Abel decides not to join in the joke and simply continues walking. After several days of travel, the two finally arrive at the city of Lum. Upon reaching the city gate, a guard is surprised to see Abel, as he believed that he had disappeared. Abel confirms that he had indeed disappeared, but managed to return safely thanks to Rio. The guard, named Nimiri, thanks Rio with great enthusiasm. After paying the entry fee, Nimiri welcomes him, while Rio feels happy to have finally arrived at the human kingdom. Later, Abel suggests that the best course of action is to go first to the Adventurers Guild. Taking advantage of the fact that he is with Rio, he will be able to recommend him when he registers, which may help him start at a higher ranking. He explains that normally when someone registers at the guild, they begin at rank F, but with a recommendation of a rank B knight or higher, the person can start directly at rank E or even rank D. Rio comments that he is proud of Abel for being a high-level knight. Abel continues explaining that the higher the ranking, the more difficult the missions the knight will be able to accept. However, the rewards will also be much greater. Even so, Abel believes that Rio probably will not have many problems with money, and asks him if the magic stones are truly worth that much. Abel responds that they are not as common as they seem, but selling many at once could affect the market. In any case, the guild master will decide that when they speak with him. As soon as they enter the guild, everyone becomes excited to see Abel. Several people approach him quickly, happy to see him again. Rio is surprised to realize that Abel is quite popular, so he decides to wait outside so as not to interfere. While walking through the city, he notices an elf who observes him intensely, almost as if she were devouring him with her eyes. She asks if that which he carries belongs to the Fairy King. Rio remains silent, a bit confused. The elf then apologizes and comments that he seems to be someone very interesting to have caught the attention of the Fairy King. After that, she says goodbye and continues on her way, saying she hopes to see him again someday. A short time later, Abel goes to look for him. Inside the guild, he introduces Rio to everyone as the man who saved his life. Rio introduces himself, and everyone thanks him animatedly for having helped Abel. After the warm reception, Abel informs the receptionist that he wishes to recommend Rio for rank D. She is surprised, as no member of the Crimson Blade group had ever recommended anyone before. Abel asserts that Rio deserves this recommendation. The receptionist says there is no problem, but explains that Rio still needs to demonstrate his strength in some way. Abel responds that this will not be a problem, but he would like to discuss this matter directly with the guild master. The receptionist goes to inform him and asks the two of them to wait in the waiting room. Some time later, the guild master runs to Abel. He is surprised to find that he is still alive, as he was very worried about his disappearance. Abel explains that he is only alive thanks to Rio, and then introduces him. The guild master introduces himself as Hug Majlas. Abel then repeats that he wants to recommend Rio, but Hug responds that he first needs to prove his worth. Abel understands but already warns that Rio is much stronger than he is. Even so, the guild master appears to doubt it. Sometime later, Abel shows all the magic stones they collected during the journey. Hug is completely surprised to realize that those stones belong to wyverns, and that there are many of them, which means they must have faced a large number of those creatures. Abel explains that they had to fight against the wyverns while trying to exit the evil mountain. That name catches Rio's attention. Then Abel explains that when he saw the road to Kailati, he realized exactly where they were. At that moment, Hug comments that no one has ever managed to cross those mountains alive, and that no adventurer approaches them unless they have a very strong reason. Therefore, hearing that Rio and Abel managed to cross them is something impressive. This feat alone demonstrates that Rio must be quite strong. At that moment, they are interrupted by Abel's teammates, who were very worried about his disappearance. Hug says they can use a room to catch up, while he proceeds with Rio to complete the guild registration. Once in Hug's office, he explains that those adventurers are part of the Crimson Blade, Abel's group, which is one of the most popular in the city. Rio then asks if he can truly be promoted directly to rank D. Hug responds that he knows Abel's strength well and knows that he could not defeat a wyvern alone. This means that Rio must also be very strong. At that moment, Nina, the receptionist, appears. Hug leaves Rio under her responsibility to carry out the registration while he continues with his paperwork. Nina introduces herself and explains that the first step is an interview. Upon realizing that Rio has no residence, she informs him that he may use the guild's rooms for up to 300 days until he finds a place to live. She also explains that the guild offers introductory classes regarding dungeons. Interested, Rio asks if he can participate. Nina replies that he can and informs him that the classes will begin in 2 days. After explaining everything, she asks Rio to place his hand on a crystal to officially complete the registration. With the registration finished, Rio leaves. Meanwhile, Hug finally manages to breathe a sigh of relief, because without Abel in the guild, everything had become very difficult to manage. He then decides to inform everyone that Abel has returned. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Rio is with Abel, who decides to take him shopping as a way to thank him for everything he has done. Rio comments that he does not need a magic wand, as he can use magic without depending on one. Furthermore, he usually uses a sword for close quarters combat. This surprises Abel a bit. When Rio shows his sword, Abel says he still has many questions to ask. Some time later, after finishing the shopping, Rio discovers something curious. In that world, a day has 24 hours, a week has 7 days, and a month has 30 days, exactly as in his previous world. This makes him think that perhaps someone from his world arrived there before him and influenced that world in some way. He finds this possibility very interesting. When Abel leaves the store, Rio thanks him for everything he bought for him, but Abel responds that it is not yet time for thanks because they have another place to go, and Rio cannot refuse since he is the guest of honor. At the guild, then, a party is organized to celebrate Abel's return. It is also for Rio, who saved his life. Everyone enjoys themselves greatly. The next day, Nina takes Rio to the room where he will be staying. There she introduces him to his roommates, Nils and Ito. After Nina leaves, they tell Rio that he does not need to be so formal and that they hope to get along well with him. Shortly after, Nina returns and announces that they will have one more new roommate. She introduces Amon, a 16-year-old boy who lost his family and went to Lum to become an adventurer and earn a living. Nina comments that Amon will also participate in the introduction to dungeons, so she hopes the two will get along well. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Ling, Abel's companion, is irritated. She says that the stories Abel told about Rio are impossible. According to her, a magic user can only project magic near themselves, but cannot make magic appear out of nowhere. Furthermore, she finds it impossible that Rio defeated golems using enormous blocks of ice, and even more absurd would be defeating wyverns with ice spears, as those creatures possess a wind barrier that repels magic. Abel responds that he understands her doubt, but he is only telling what he truly saw. At that moment, another companion of theirs named Hela comments that the only person said to be capable of doing things of that level was the so-called Infernal Mage. He was extremely famous, as he incinerated more than 1,000 Imperial soldiers with a single spell. Moreover, they say he erased an entire city from the map with just one invocation. Therefore, if what Abel is saying is true, Rio is someone extremely exceptional, and if he were ever to become their enemy, he would be the worst type of adversary possible. The worst-case scenario would be Rio allying himself with the Empire, but Abel responds with great confidence that this will never happen. According to him, Rio detests the name of the Debari Empire, although even he himself does not understand exactly why. 6 days later, Rio finishes the introductory classes about the dungeon, and now, finally, he will have the chance to enter the first level of a dungeon for the first time. Abel is not very excited about finally entering the dungeon, though Rio asks him to calm down a bit. At that moment, the instructor asks if anyone has a question. Then Rio asks if there is any way to travel to a dungeon level where the person has already been before. Regarding that famous TP, the instructor explains that in the southern dungeons, this is possible, at least according to the information he possesses. Unfortunately, in the dungeon of Luen, this cannot be done, and he is even somewhat surprised that Rio has this type of information. Some time later, they go to the dungeon. There, an instructor mentions that the barriers around it exist to protect the city from monsters. Because every few years the so-called Great Tide occurs, an overflow of magical energy that causes monsters to leave the dungeon. Upon approaching a bit closer, an instructor also explains that the guild office located next to the dungeon is used to register the names of the people who enter and the time of entry. However, since they are in an introduction course that day, it is not necessary to register. As they enter, Rio notices that Amon is very nervous, so he recommends that he take a deep breath. When they reach the first level, the instructor explains that on the first floor, they will not encounter dangerous monsters. Therefore, he allows them to explore the location, as long as they do not stray too far from the entrance. Amon follows along with Rio, and then Rio comments that he can sense a presence further ahead. It is a monster, but it is not something dangerous, so he tells Amon that he will immobilize it so that he can deliver the final blow. Rio uses his ice magic with great ease to immobilize it completely, and then Amon, following his instructions, ends up defeating the creature. Meanwhile, Rio takes charge of collecting the monster's magic stone. Some time later, upon returning to the residence, the young men celebrate, since Rio and Amon completed the introduction to the dungeons and were able to see one for the first time. Even so, they regret a bit the fact that they cannot have alcohol in the room. Ito comments that it is impressive that they defeated a soldier ant with such ease. However, Amon confesses that they only managed to do so thanks to Rio. Rio asks him not to give him all the credit, since Amon also participated in the fight. Then, Nils comments that the most important thing is that they obtained a magic stone, and that they should rejoice because of that. He asks what they intend to do the next day, and Amon reveals that he wants to return to the dungeon. However, he admits that he feels a bit of fear about going alone, since he does not yet have much experience. Rio then offers to accompany him, because he was also thinking of going and venturing as far as the 3rd level. Even so, Rio comments that he found it a bit strange that the soldier ant appeared on the 1st floor, since that is not something very common, especially there, where normally only bats appear. Ito mentions that in recent months many soldier ants have appeared on the first 2 levels, which is quite suspicious. This causes Rio to start wondering what might be happening in that place. At that moment, Abel appears and comments that this happens because the ants dig tunnels until they reach the 1st floor. Rio responds that a veteran adventurer like him should not be bothered by the novices. However, Abel says that he was only explaining this to reassure them. Next, he introduces himself to Rio's roommates and asks that they get along well with him, because despite being a good person, his personality can be a bit complicated. Even so, the young men are surprised to realize that he is Abel, from the Crimson Blade group. Nils introduces himself to him with great enthusiasm, making it clear that the famous Abel is practically a celebrity. Then, Rio asks what he is doing at the guild so late. Abel responds that he was performing a job with his group, but they ended up taking longer than expected. Just at that moment, his companions arrive to look for him and ask that he stop hiding. One of them asks Syrah to take him away, leaving Abel in a quite embarrassing situation. Before leaving, Ling casts a look at Rio. Finding it strange, he asks what is happening. However, his other companion asks that she come back and apologize to Rio, explaining that they need to leave to inform the guild master about the work they performed. After they leave, Ito comments that Syrah is practically an angel, while Nils continues praising Abel. Meanwhile, Syrah comments to Ling that she should not look at Rio in that manner. However, Ling responds that she cannot help it, because she feels a great deal of curiosity about him. Abel, for his part, comments that very soon everyone will see Rio's true strength. The next day, Rio and Amon go to the dungeon again. There they face a group of wolves, which are defeated with great ease thanks to Rio's skill. While they rest, Rio comments that the way Amon handles the sword is very reminiscent of Abel's style. For this reason, he asks if his master was not also an adventurer from the same place. Amon responds that his master was named Cairo, and that he learned to use the sword at a school in the royal capital. He explains that it is a famous style called Yumi. Rio simply listens and comments that when Amon completely masters this style, he will certainly become someone incredible. Amon then responds that he thought Rio was only a magician, but ended up discovering that he is also very good with the sword. Rio explains that this is because he had a master who fought with him all the time. Even so, his style is somewhat more original, so he cannot say that he has mastered it completely. Next, Rio asks if Amon has rested enough. Excited, Amon stands up quickly, but Rio warns him not to hurry too much. He explains that Amon's fighting style is quite exhausting. However, he is certain that when he masters it, this style will be capable of protecting him from any danger. Even so, he recommends that Amon improve his endurance, because if he continues training constantly, he will improve little by little. Rio then reveals that he traveled for a time with Abel, and that the first thing he did upon waking up every morning was to train. For this reason, it does not matter if someone possesses talent. Even geniuses need to train. Amon becomes thrilled with this elite athlete mentality and responds that he will give his best. Some time later, Rio goes to the library to research alchemy, as he is very interested in this subject. However, while walking through a plaza, he thinks that if he truly wants to improve in alchemy, he will need to buy his own books, and he begins to wonder how much they cost. Suddenly, an enormous shadow covers the entire city. Rio is surprised to realize that it is an eclipse. Immediately afterward, all the people around him disappear. Rio instantly enters a state of alert upon feeling that the world around him seems completely different. Suddenly, he blocks an enormous blast of flames. When he is able to see, a demon girl approaches him, commenting that she can easily deal with a human like him. Rio becomes worried, as he can feel that that girl possesses a power equivalent to that of a griffin. For him, the best option at that moment would be to flee. However, he wonders if he will be able to escape from that strange space. At that instant, the girl launches a powerful fire attack. Rio manages to protect himself using his ice defense. However, shortly after, she fires another type of magic. The demon is impressed upon realizing that the attack did not pierce his heart. She comments that it is impressive that he managed to block her infernal magic. Still, she never imagined that he would also manage to nullify her wind spear. However, upon observing Rio's attire more closely, she realizes that he is wearing a garment of the Fairy King. In light of this, she asserts that she has no choice but to finish him off the hard way. Wielding her sword, she advances against Rio, who manages to defend himself with great difficulty. Rio counterattacks using an ice spear, but the girl manages to dodge easily. Even so, Rio notices that she is using wind magic to increase the speed of her movements. The demon begins to laugh uncontrollably, declaring that she is going to finish him. Meanwhile, Rio realizes that both are exchanging extremely dangerous blows. Even so, her attacks do not compare to those of his master. The demon then notices that Rio also possesses the sword of the Fairy King and begins to wonder who he truly is. Furthermore, he manages to summon magic with impressive speed. Considering him someone too dangerous for her plans, she decides that she cannot allow him to remain alive. The two then fight with everything they have. Rio uses his enormous capacity for aquatic magic, while the girl utilizes a great variety of magics. They block and attack repeatedly. At a certain moment, she manages to knock Rio far away. However, she does not realize that she has fallen into his trap. Rio then creates a rain of boiling water that begins to burn her. The demon quickly creates a defense to protect herself. When the rain finally stops, she emerges from the defense furious. Upon noticing that the eclipse is about to end, she comments that it is a shame, but her time is up. She admits that Rio is a quite interesting human, although she would love to continue that entertaining fight. She explains that the isolation she created was special, but that she still possesses little control over it. Rio orders her to leave. At that moment, the girl introduces herself as Leonor Araka Albuquerque and asks for his name. Rio then introduces himself and calls her Akuma, which leaves her a bit surprised. She asks how he knows of the existence of the Akumas and regrets not having finished him off by all possible means. Even so, she recognizes that an enemy like him would not fall so easily. Still, Leonor declares that they will meet again, and should it not be with her, Rio will end up facing one of the others. Rio becomes somewhat worried upon realizing that she is speaking in the plural. Then Leonor asks that he let no one else kill him, for his life belongs to her, and only she may take it. When the eclipse ends, Leonor disappears. Rio simply complains to himself, thinking that were it not for those special clothes, he would have ended up with a hole in his shoulder. After that, he decides to continue his investigation. To do so, he goes to speak with the guild master in order to obtain some money by selling the wyvern magic stones. When he arrives at his room, he notices that the young men are not there. However, upon looking through the window, he sees that they are being beaten by some bullies. Without thinking twice, he goes to help them and defeats most of the aggressors with great ease. Nils then warns Rio that that young man is Dan, from room number 1. Rio is happy to finally meet him and asks if, now that he no longer has the company of his friends, he intends to flee. Dan advances against him, but Rio leaves him incapacitated with a single movement. Afterward, he comments to the young men that it was the minimum he could do for them, as they have been keeping up with the training runs every day. Later, they go to take a bath. There, Ito tends to Rio's wound, mentioning that a blow like that to the heart would have been fatal. Rio confesses that the blow was indeed destined for his heart, but he managed to dodge it by a very narrow margin. The young men are surprised and ask whom he was fighting. However, Rio only responds that he will tell them on another occasion, if there is time. For now, he can only think about investigating more regarding that strange space. But at the moment, he decides just to relax. Sometime later, Ammon, Nils, and Ito are working together as a team while advancing through the dungeon. Currently, they are on the 5th floor and become a bit worried, as goblin archers should not appear at that level. The young men decide they have done enough for that day and resolve to leave, as their safety comes first. Although they would love to form a team with Rio, they know it is ideal for adventurers to form groups with members of similar levels, and Rio is far superior to them. It was fortunate they decided to leave, because further ahead another group of adventurers ends up being massacred by an enormous monster. Meanwhile, Rio continues thinking about the battle he had with Leonor, considering it an incredible fight. Her magic was on another level. Fortunately, the two were balanced in terms of invocation speed. Even so, he feels he needs to further develop his strengths to reinforce his weaknesses and transform them into new fortresses. Rio remembers that Leonor used wind magic to increase her speed, This makes him feel a bit of envy, as she can use various types of magic. But he knows it is not the time to envy anyone, but rather to think about how he could move with the same speed using his own water magic. The first idea that comes to his mind is the water jet, something he could easily use underwater. However, on solid ground, the situation is different. Without wasting time, he begins to perform experiments. First, he creates an ice floor and then tries to propel himself using water from his back. But let us say things did not turn out exactly as he expected. Still, it is all part of the process. After that, he decides to go to the library to research more about the Akumas and also about alchemy. Curiously, at the library, he encounters Luen. She is looking for information about someone capable of using ice magic in the air or launching ice spears strong enough to pierce the defenses of a wyvern. Not even her great master would be capable of doing something like that. She imagines that these are probably original spells, and indeed they are, as they were developed by Rio. Even so, Luen believes that the only one capable of doing something of that sort would be the infernal mage of the Empire. At that moment, Syrah appears, the elf whom Rio had met previously. Luen tries to ask her something about that subject, but ends up deciding to keep the question to herself. Meanwhile, Syrah says goodbye, as there is a messenger waiting for her. On the other hand, the trio of adventurers returns to the guild and shows Nina the magic stones they obtained from the goblin archers. The situation is somewhat alarming, as it has been years since any goblin archer has been seen on the 5th level. Therefore, Nina decides to immediately inform the guild master, thanking the young men for having brought this information. Some time later, the guild master comments to Nina that this might be an evil omen. This is because goblin archers normally appear only from the 10th level onward. He then asks how many rank B adventure groups are currently in the city. Nina responds that there are 2, Crimson Blade and White Brigade. The guild master requests that she call both groups to his office to personally propose a plan of action. Some time later, Abel's group heads to the guild master's office, complaining a bit about having to team up with the White Brigade. The girls ask if he was not friends with Phelps and tell him to stop complaining so much. Upon entering the room, they realize that the White Brigade is already present. The guild master thanks everyone for attending and comments that they are likely already aware of the situation. He explains that the information is highly reliable, as the adventurers who encountered the goblin archers brought their magic stones as proof. Phelps then asks what the guild master's proposal is. The master responds that he wants the 2 groups to form a team to investigate possible signs of the Great Tide, that is, an overflow, something similar to a sudden growth in the monster population inside the dungeon. It has been 10 years since the last Great Tide, so there is a possibility that another one could happen at any moment. He informs them that he will pay 100 gold coins in advance and another 200 coins upon completion of the mission. The task consists of verifying if there are signs of a great tide. Should one already be in development, they must return to the surface immediately. After that, they must abandon the dungeon entrance and position themselves at the second wall, so that adventurers and knights can work together on a defense plan. Abel comments that it seems like a very well-prepared plan. The master informs them that the order to close the dungeon has already been given, and then he asks if they accept the mission, as they will begin the following day. Both groups agree and end up accepting the task. The next day, very early in the morning, Rio informs his roommates that he will be leaving early, as he intends to visit the northern wing of the library. According to him, the most advanced materials are located in that sector, and he wants to learn much more about alchemy. Furthermore, he believes he might find information there regarding the Akumas. Ammon asks if it is true that there are forbidden books in that section. Ito responds that it seems so, but only rank B adventurers have access to them. Rio then decides to proceed to the library. The young men also leave, as they plan to go to the dungeon that day. By all appearances, they are not yet informed about the gravity of the situation. Meanwhile, upon arriving at the library, Rio heads to the northern wing. He is impressed by the size of the place and feels that he might need help to find the material he is looking for. At the same time, he thinks it would be strange to simply arrive asking for information related to the Akumas. At the moment he climbs the stairs, he ends up encountering Syrah, becoming quite surprised to see her. Meanwhile, at the dungeon entrance, the Crimson Blade and White Brigade groups are gathered with the guild master. It is observed that the White Brigade possesses more than 20 adventurers of rank C or higher, with the goal of completing the mission quickly. However, before the dungeon door is opened, Abel interrupts the guild master. He says he has a very bad feeling, and therefore he asks Ling to use the Wind Probe spell to analyze the first level of the dungeon. When Ling does this, she is surprised and warns that there are several signals right at the entrance, in fact, hundreds of them. Upon realizing the gravity of the situation, the guild master immediately orders everyone to retreat and to warn the knights and everyone at the guild. Without wasting time, they close the dungeon door. Meanwhile, Nils, Ito, and Aemon, who are at the guild, realize that the dungeon has been closed. At that exact moment, an urgent warning arrives. The great tide has begun and the monsters are going to leave the dungeon. Therefore, everyone must position themselves at the first wall and attack all the monsters that emerge from the dungeon. Meanwhile, Syrah presents herself before Rio, still with that somewhat silly expression on her face. Syrah comments that she already knew they would meet again, which leaves Rio a bit confused. She then asks what brought him to the library. Rio almost makes a slip while trying to mention the Akumas. He becomes nervous when speaking to women, but he quickly corrects himself, saying that he is interested in alchemy because he wants to create a golem. Syrah is surprised to see that he has such an ambitious project. Even so, she warns that she doubts very much that there are books in the library that explain directly how to create a golem. However, she says he can use the books in that place to find some clues. Next, she invites him to accompany her, as she knows the library very well. Rio follows her, excited, and comments that he likes books very much. He mentions that he used to spend the whole day reading, although it has been a long time since he last touched one, and being in that place ends up awakening a certain nostalgia. Syrah responds that he speaks as if he were referring to decades ago. A bit nervous, Rio changes the subject and asks if she is an elf. He says he is not quite sure, making a silly joke as if she could be some kind of strange creature. Syrah responds that yes, she is an elf. Furthermore, she is also an adventurer, just like him, and is part of a rank B group called Windy, although at the moment she is the group's only member. Rio comments that a friend told him there was only one elf in the city. Syrah replies that it is indeed not common to find elves living in human settlements. However, she is a special case. Thanks to that, she was able to meet him, something she says she was very happy to do. This makes Rio blush a little, so while the two talk peacefully there, the rest of the adventurers are on high alert, positioned atop the second wall. Finally, the monsters begin to emerge from the dungeon and the adventurers initiate the attack. At first, they manage to maintain a good advantage. However, the quantity of monsters is enormous. Fortunately, the Marquess of Luen, Commander Neville, arrives to help. Even so, they still have difficulty quickly eliminating that massive wave of monsters. The guild master becomes worried, because during the last great tide, there were not as many monsters as there are now. The battle continues for a long time and the adventurers begin to run out of arrows. Fortunately, at that moment, new supplies arrive to replenish them. Soon after, Nils informs Abel that the guild master asked to let him know that there might be a gigantic monster behind the wall. Therefore, the Crimson Blade must take charge of it and needs to be prepared. Abel responds that he will take care of everything. At dusk, after eliminating most of the monsters, Crimson Blade and White Brigade descend from the wall to eliminate the remaining monsters and face the leader of the horde. When they find it, they initially think it is just a goblin general. However, shortly after, two more appear. This makes everyone realize that if there are 3 goblin generals, then there is likely a goblin king behind them. The adventurers decide to act quickly to eliminate the 3 before the goblin king appears and makes the situation even more complicated. During the battle, everyone senses something strange and quickly ducks. At that instant, the 3 goblin generals are killed by the goblin king himself. Abel is impressed upon seeing the power of that creature, which is willing even to kill its own generals to defeat its enemies. Phelps and Abel advance against the monster, but their attacks cannot penetrate its defense. Meanwhile, the guild master trusts them, as he believes that Phelps's spear and Abel's sword are the only weapons capable of piercing that monster. Abel then decides to use his last card and manages to pierce the Goblin King's chest. Even so, that is not enough to defeat it. However, that was only a distraction. At that moment, Ling uses her bullet rain technique, riddling the Goblin King with multiple shots and finally securing the victory. Phelps comments to Abel that he is quite impressed. Soon after, all the adventurers begin to applaud them and celebrate. Everyone feels relieved, believing that it has finally all ended. However, inside the dungeon, it seems that something else is still happening. Some time later, the adventurers are gathered at the guild, intensely celebrating the great victory. Meanwhile, Hugh observes the situation and wonders what they are celebrating. For his part, the guildmaster is completely overwhelmed. He would like to be drinking along with everyone, but he needs to deal with an enormous amount of paperwork. He is so busy that he practically has no social life left. He needs to leave everything prepared so that investigators can analyze what happened inside the dungeon. Meanwhile, on the ground floor of the guild, Hugh finally discovers why everyone is celebrating. His friends explain that Abel was incredible during the battle. At that moment, Abel appears, interrupting the conversation and commenting that he managed to dodge an attack using perfect shadow, a technique that allows one to evade ranged attacks. Soon after, the girls join the conversation. They were looking for Abel and already imagined he would be talking to Hugh. Hugh notices a certain tone of resentment in her comments but does not understand the reason. Then, Ling asks if it is true that he can summon an ice wall in the air. Hugh confirms this and explains that the height limit of the technique is approximately 40 meters. He also comments that it was not at all easy to learn this, as it took a long time to master it. Lin asks if that is an original spell, since most magic is used through already existing enchantments. However, Abel responds that he believes spells are something very personal, and that each mage should have their own style. Lin is surprised to hear that. Soon after, Rio says goodbye to the girls, saying he needs to go eat before there is no food left. Abel comments that the fact that Rio creates his own spells is something truly unique. However, he also mentions that Rio can use magic within enchantments, which makes Lin wonder how he manages to do that, as it should be something impossible. Sometime later, the three friends are discouraged because the dungeon remains closed. Furthermore, there aren't many jobs available. The guild has plenty of reserves, and no buyers are requesting materials at the moment. Because of this, missions are almost non-existent. The guys ask Rio what he is doing there. Rio responds that he is looking for materials for his alchemy practices, but unfortunately, he couldn't find any. The guys comment that magic copper mineral is something very expensive. However, paying for it isn't a problem for Rio, since he's a playboy wealthy. Realizing that his friends are going through financial difficulties, Rio proposes hiring them. He suggests they get magic copper from an abandoned mine near Hasai. Rio intends to pay 4 gold coins to each of them. Additionally, he will pay 25 gold coins for the magic mineral. Surprised, the guys ask if he is really sure he wants to pay all that. Rio responds that even so, he would still be paying less than he would in the city, so he doesn't see a problem. Without thinking much, the guys accept. Even so, Rio asks them to be careful. Sometime later, he hears a commotion. Looking through the window, he notices some knights are trying to take a girl by force. Fortunately, an adventurer intervenes and tells them to go away, saying that the girl is clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Even so, the knights do not intend to give up. They look down on the adventurer, saying that although they won't kill him, they will give him a very big beating. Just as the leader of the knights advances against him to leave him crippled, he suddenly falls to the ground. Confused, he asks the adventurer what he did. The young man, equally confused, responds that he simply fell on his own. This irritates the knight, who tries to attack again, but ends up tripping once more. Everyone begins to wonder what is happening. At that moment, Phelps appears and asks the kingdom's knights what they think they are doing, calling them a bunch of idiots. The knight asks who he thinks he is to challenge the kingdom's knights, saying he will have the guild expel him. However, Phelps tells him to behave like a true knight. He explains that although he is an adventurer, he is also a noble of the kingdom, and then introduces himself as Phelps Hailani, heir to the Hailani family. Upon hearing that name, the knights are immediately terrified, as they recognize the surname of the former knight commander. Phelps then confirms that Alex Hailani is his father. Realizing they made a huge mistake, the knights leave quickly. The adventurers thank Phelps for helping them, but Phelps tells the young man that he acted like a true adventurer by protecting the girl. He asks him to accompany her to ensure she leaves safely. At that moment, Rio appears at the window observing the situation. Phelps then asks if he is the famous Rio. He introduces himself as the leader of the White Brigade and comments that Abel has already told him a lot about him. Rio gets a little nervous, remembering that he froze one of the knight's legs. However, Phelps tells him not to worry after all. The knight fell on his own. At that moment, Phelps's companion calls him, saying they need to go. They say goodbye while Rio watches them, thinking that both seem to be very strong. Even so, he wonders why a Marquess's son would choose to be an adventurer. Later that night, while Rio is eating, Abel approaches and comments that it's strange to see him dining alone. Rio responds that he could say the same. as Abel seems to be heading to the red light district. Abel gets nervous and asks him to speak more quietly because someone might hear. Rio then asks if he has a woman in his heart. Abel responds that he is mistaken. Even so, Rio continues teasing and says he should try something with Luen. Abel responds that, actually, Luen likes Elaine. Shortly after, he realizes he spoke too much and asks Rio to forget what he said. Rio comments that they would make a very peculiar couple. Actually, peculiar is an understatement. He jokes saying that Elaine would probably end up killing Luen by accident. Then, Rio says that if that isn't the case, perhaps Abel is in love with Rio. This makes Abel even more nervous, and he asks to change the subject. He explains that he went to speak with Rio because he wants to ask for his help. While walking through the city, Abel mentions that the investigator who is headed to Luen is a friend of his. This investigator is accompanied by royal knights serving as bodyguards. The problem is that some of them appear to be corrupt, and Abel wants to identify them before they cause any trouble. At that moment, Rio interrupts Abel and comments that those adventurers were not present at the welcome party. Abel explains that since the city possesses a dungeon, it is normal for outside adventurers to appear. The problem is that the dungeon is currently closed, which makes the whole situation rather suspicious. Deciding to investigate, the two of them follow this lead. Suddenly, they end up being ambushed. Even so, Rio defeats the attackers with great ease. Abel then picks up a box filled with alchemy materials. Rio, excited, asks if he can keep it. However, Abel responds that he cannot, as that item is evidence. Upon examining the enemy's belongings, they discover that they are C-rank adventurers. All of them come from Jikler, the capital of Andalil. The young men depart and leave the enemies tied up. Meanwhile, in another location, Phelps is being followed by the same knights from before. Their leader wants to take revenge for having been humiliated. However, suddenly, they become paralyzed. Immediately afterward, they are incinerated by Phelps' companion. Phelps then congratulates her, saying that she did a good job. On the following day, at the guild master complains to the investigators. He says that they arrived in the city and began doing whatever they wanted. They took the guild's supplies and even opened the dungeon as if it were nothing. The investigators then inform Matt Glass that he has renamed Count Harold as the Minister of the Interior and leader of that investigation expedition. Furthermore, he granted total authority over the region. Hug does not find this reasonable at all. However, Cliff asks if he happens to not know what total authority means. At that moment, another member of the investigators apologizes to Hug regarding the matter of the food supplies. He says they will try to send more supplies from the nearby cities. Even so, they state that they need to open and investigate the dungeon. Without many options, Hug accepts, but he makes one thing very clear. If something happens, neither Luen, nor the adventurers, nor the guild will be held responsible. Clyde becomes irritated, as he does not agree with this, but Hug maintains his firm position. In the end, the rest of the investigators decide to agree with Hug, since the situation is what it is. Meanwhile, in another place, Rio goes to Abel's residence. There, he notices a little girl running desperately in search of an adventurer. She approaches him and asks if he is an adventurer, because she needs to reach the Adventurers Guild as quickly as possible. She asks if he could show her the way, but Rio refuses, saying that he is hungry and wants to go eat. Nevertheless, the girl insists, explaining that she needs to deliver a letter with great urgency. Upon seeing her determination, Rio eventually gives in. He takes her to Abel and his group. The girl then delivers a letter from Master Hilarion. After reading the contents, Abel informs his companions that they are requested to support the court mages, who will investigate the dungeon. Rio asks if the dungeon was not closed. Abel responds that he is almost certain they opened it for the idiots sent by the kingdom. Even so, there is something that causes concern. He tells them that decades ago, when the dungeon remained closed for a time, a rank group entered there and never returned. And no, it was not just any group. Their leader was incredibly strong, almost S-rank, which is why no one knows for sure what happened inside the dungeon after a great tide. Rio comments that in this case, the most sensible thing would be to enter and investigate. Immediately after, he completely changes the subject, asking who is hungry, and finally leaves so that he can eat. After that, the girl introduces herself to the group. Her name is Natalie Sharks-Ueski. Upon hearing her surname, Luen asks if she belongs to the great family of water mages. Natalie responds that she does, but says it is nothing special. Luen does not miss the opportunity and asks if she knows any spell capable of creating an ice wall from a distance, literally appearing in mid-air out of nowhere. Natalie responds that she has never heard of such magic. Abel asks Luen if she is still going to continue with this, but Luen responds that there is no way to stop any mage from becoming interested in someone like Rio. Natalie then asks if any such magic truly exists. The young men respond that it does. After all, Rio, the boy who just left, is capable of doing that. Abel takes the moment to make one thing very clear. None of them are permitted to face Rio. They know very well that even if the four of them fought together against him, they would inevitably lose. And if they were ever to face him as an enemy, the best course of action would be to surrender. Abel also advises Natalie that if she cannot find them, she may look for Rio. He even mentions where she will likely be able to find him. Meanwhile, on the dungeon road, one of the investigators shows Abel a residual mana detector, which will be used to perform analyses. Abel finds it very interesting. The elderly investigator comments that he finds it curious to see him interested in alchemy. Abel responds that it is not actually him, but rather a friend of his. The old man then teases him by asking if he truly has friends. However, contrary to any doubts, he indeed has them. Sometime later, at nightfall, Rio's companions return. They are happy to have completed their work. Thanks to Rio, they manage to obtain 900,000 florin. They are also surprised to discover that the dungeon has been reopened. Rio explains that for the time being, only adventurers of rank D or higher may enter. He also says that there will be a meeting the following day and recommends that they participate. In this manner, 3 days pass. Abel's group has already reached level 7 of the dungeon, but they have found nothing strange. Abel notices that the people from the Central Royal University seem to be in a hurry. Ria comments that, from what she knows, there is a theory that the monsters of the Grand Tide originate on level 38 of the dungeon. Meanwhile, at the Adventurers Guild, Hug makes an announcement to everyone. He explains that, unfortunately, rank E and F adventurers will not be allowed to enter the dungeon. On the other hand, since they requested supplies from other cities, the caravans will require escorts. Therefore, he hopes to find volunteers to assist with protection. At that moment, Rio asks Hug if it is true that the monsters of the Grand Tide left stones behind, and if that is true, what was the color of those stones? Hug responds that all the magic stones from the Grand Tide were white, including those from the Goblin King and the Goblin Generals. Rio finds this quite curious. Meanwhile, inside the dungeon, the group from the Central Royal University finds a strange door. It appears to connect to another location. Cliff finds it extremely interesting and orders his team to prepare everything to analyze the portal as quickly as possible. Quickly, they begin the preparations. When they finish, they attempt to analyze the mana density of the portal. But at the moment they touch it, everyone is transported to another place. As it happens, they were struck by a truck and reborn in another world. I am only joking, everyone. Natalie notices that the readings suddenly disappeared. Abel asks his companions if everyone is alright. Upon seeing that everything is in order, he asks Arthur where they are. Arthur responds that it seems they have been teleported, as if that were not already obvious, and from what he can perceive, they are no longer inside the dungeon. On the other side, they ask Cliff what is happening. He responds that they were teleported to another place. Even so, he considers it a fascinating discovery. Perhaps all the information they had regarding the Grand Tide was incorrect. The monsters that appeared during the Grand Tide may originate from within that portal. Cliff becomes completely excited. With a discovery such as this, he believes he will easily be able to rise to the position of department head. However, suddenly, far in the distance, they begin to see strange figures approaching them. Meanwhile, outside the dungeon, Natalie receives a small signal that quickly disappears. She becomes confused upon realizing that the signal indicated level 40 of the dungeon. At that moment, Christopher Blatuski enters the tent and asks to be informed about what is happening, as he is the one responsible for the investigation as the king's envoy. He asks them to be cautious and to share only the information they are certain they can disclose. It is remembered that everyone who entered the dungeon disappeared suddenly, exactly before their eyes. Natalie confirms that the readings were not wrong. She reveals to Christopher that she received the signal, but only for a brief moment, and that it came from level 40. Kevin and Christopher become worried. After all, no adventurer has ever managed to surpass level 38. And after level 30, the dungeon already becomes extremely dangerous, even for rank B adventurers. At that moment, one of the investigators informs Christopher that Grinsome Sword, the rank B group from Luen, was accompanying the research team. In other words, it is very likely that they are also inside. Natalie becomes worried upon realizing that the group of young men is in danger and runs off. Meanwhile, at the guild, they inform Hug that the entire dungeon investigation team has suddenly disappeared. and that the university veteran, Christopher, is requesting that he go to the dungeon entrance. Hug stands up immediately, worried about Abel's group. He asks the receptionist not to disclose any information to anyone until he returns with further details. Meanwhile, in another location, Hill is at the Great Library. He is complaining slightly about life. The place is enormous, and he has no idea what exactly he is looking for. As he climbs the stairs, he feels somewhat discouraged at not seeing Syrah, but suddenly she speaks to him, which causes Hill to cheer up. He explains that he wishes to check the records of ancient eclipses and the grand tides, but he has no clue where to begin. Syrah, excited, offers to assist him. As they walk toward the books, she asks if he believes there is any connection between the eclipses and the grand tide. Hill responds that it is merely a hunch, but Syrah says that his assumption is quite accurate. She explains that eclipses have always occurred before a tide. However, a total eclipse like the last one had never happened before. She confesses that she has also investigated the matter a little. Even so, she is curious to know how Hill reached that conclusion. Hill responds that it was only a feeling. In truth, he feels he cannot reveal that he faced an Akuma during an eclipse, so he quickly changes the subject. He asks if she knows why the monster's magic stones change color. Syrah realizes he is trying to change the subject, but decides to play along. She explains that magic stones take on more intense colors as the monsters live for longer periods. Hill responds that a friend told him the same thing, so why did this idiot ask? Well, he was curious about the color of the magic stones from the monsters of the Grand Tide. After all, they were pale, and the monsters that emerged in the Grand Tide were goblin generals and a goblin king creatures that should have lived for a long time. Therefore, it would make sense for their magic stones to have more intense colors, but that was not the case. For this reason, Hill suspects that these monsters may have been created artificially. However, something like that would require an enormous amount of energy. Hill then asks something curious. He asks if Syrah already knew about the magic stones of the Grand Tide monsters. Syrah responds that there were records of previous Grand Tide. However, those records were heavily deteriorated, and several pages were missing. Because of this, not even the librarians were fully aware of that information. She asks if Hill would like to take a look at those documents. Excited, Hill goes with her. Meanwhile, inside the dungeon, the investigators show Arthur that the magic device is still functioning. This means that perhaps, soon, they will be able to send their location. Of course, provided they are still inside the dungeon. Link comments that if they truly are in the dungeon, perhaps they can receive help. But Arthur interrupts immediately. He says he highly doubts it. Then he asks Rhea if the scent of that place does not seem familiar. Rhea uses her perception more intently and realizes something important. It appears they are inside some type of barrier, one very similar to the closed sanctuary barrier, a spell exclusive to high-level priests, considered even a divine miracle, basically the perfect defensive spell. Abel then comments to his group that it seems they are trapped inside a gigantic barrier, so large that they cannot even detect its boundaries. Abel asks Link to use search magic to see if she can detect anything. When she does so, she informs him that she senses several human presences about 500 meters away. Furthermore, there are another 50 presences that she cannot identify. Arthur assumes the human presences must be Clyde's group, who likely ended up in that place. Therefore, they decide the best course of action is to regroup as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, outside the dungeon, they inform Hug that the investigation group is on level 40 of the dungeon. Or at least, that is what the last reading indicated. Hug laments this and hopes it is an error. After all, not even all the adventurers in the city combined would be able to advance to that level. In other words, there is no way to send help. Christopher explains that neither he nor his subordinates can do anything. They still do not know why everyone disappeared in that manner, and attempting to enter now would be an enormous risk. Hug understands the situation. Now, all they can do is pray. Pray that everyone is still alive and well. But unfortunately, the situation inside does not look good at all. Clyde's group is being attacked by a powerful blast of magic launched from a distance, and this attack begins to rapidly eliminate the members of the group. The investigation team wonders what that is. As the creatures draw closer, Clyde panics, realizing they are demons. He had never seen one before, but the description matches the records exactly. Meanwhile, Clyde's group continues to be massacred. From a distance, Abel's group realizes they are being attacked by demons. Rhea comments that these creatures are enemies of the gods and angels, beings that are practically immune to magic and far more powerful than humans. Everyone wonders what these demons are doing in that place, but Arthur orders everyone to move immediately, stating that it is not the time for small talk or question. Clyde is still wondering why the demons would be there when, suddenly, in the blink of an eye, they begin to be attacked by Abel's group. Rhea is surprised to realize that magic truly causes them no damage. Arthur explains that this was never confirmed with certainty. Furthermore, 3 large groups of mages are attacking the same target. Even if the demon's defense is strong, it must eventually give way. The group continues annihilating the demons. At that moment, Abel notices the presence of someone who appears to be their leader. The problem is that the mages are beginning to run out of mana, so the time comes for Abel and his group to take action. Oron takes charge of blocking the attacks. Meanwhile, Luen and Rhea combine their magic to break through the demon's defenses. Abel also fights very well, and Arthur realizes that Abel's group truly lives up to its reputation. Unfortunately, Luen runs out of mana, and to make matters worse, they have no potion. There are still 6 demons remaining, including the leader. Rhea warns Abel that the leader is likely a demon prince, as the color of his eyes is different, exactly as the records describe. Abel immediately understands a demon prince to be the childhood form of a demon lord, and as far as is known, only 4 can exist at the same time. One of them will eventually become the demon king. They are extremely powerful, so powerful that, according to history, not even heroes have managed to defeat one of them. Abel then decides to eliminate the demons surrounding the prince. There is a small possibility that by doing so, the barrier will break and they will be able to escape. Abel advances against the demons while Luther recalls that they have faced worse situations, such as when they were attacked by a griffin. He quickly defeats 2 demons, but then the demon prince attacks the group. Fortunately, Orin manages to defend them. Even so, the demon gives no respite and charges at Abel, who can barely block his blows. Clyde's group attacks from a distance, but their magic has no effect whatsoever. The remaining demons attack their group, forcing the other mages to retreat. Abel's companions fall into despair upon realizing that he is facing such a monstrosity. The demon attacks him again. Abel uses his null spin technique, but it is of no use. With a single blow, the demon sends him flying backward. The demon prince prepares to deliver the final strike, and Rhea, terrified, can only scream, but in a completely unexpected manner. Rio enters the battle. He appears simply by descending from the ceiling and, before anything else, begins to provoke Abel, saying that he is in a deplorable state. He says he cannot believe that such a weak monster has left him in that condition. Arthur is confused and wonders who that boy is. Rio then tells Abel to get up because they need to return. After all, the entire city is worried about them. Abel responds that he would love to leave, but he cannot because the demon prince is preventing it. Rio asks, somewhat irritated, if that is the son of the demon king or something of the sort. Abel asks him not to take it as a joke, but Rio tells him not to worry while he blocks the demon's attacks. Immediately afterward, he uses a water jet and rips off the head of one of them. Finally, he stands face to face with the demon prince. The demon only observes him in silence. Rio, irritated, says he is tired of everyone looking at him that way. He then draws his sword and tells the demon prince that it is time to end this. But before the battle truly begins, the story shows what happened previously. Natalie had run off to look for Rio, since she did not find him in his room. The young men said he was heading to the library. Fortunately, she managed to find him on the way. Desperate, she told him that Abel had disappeared in the dungeon. Rio became serious, created a path of ice, and asked her to explain everything while they went there. Upon arriving at the dungeon, Rio asks why she came looking for him. Natalie responded that Abel had said that if she ever needed help and he was not around, she could look for Rio. Rio understood the situation. With all the information in mind, he decided to act immediately. When he tried to enter the dungeon, they tried to stop him, but he simply opened paths through the ice wall. Once inside the dungeon, he knew he could not waste time, so instead of searching for stairs, he simply opened a path directly through the dungeon floor. And that was how he arrived at that spot. Now back to the present. Rio looks at the demon prince and asks a question, wanting to know if he is not going to attack. Someone comments that Rio seems like a pincher, small and noisy, but he bites. The demon prince charges at Rio. However, Rio dodges with great ease and severs the demon's head, commenting that Leonor was much faster. But then something unexpected occurs, and the demon prince stands up, picks up his own head, and sets it back into place. Even so, Rio does not care at all, as his former master did not even have a head. He comments that he will now see how long the demon can resist, because for a candidate, he seems quite weak. Then, Rio uses his water jet magic a million times. The attack cuts the demon prince into pieces, literally. The demon's resistance cannot withstand it. His core breaks, and he eventually turns into dust. After the battle, Abel thanks Rio for saving him, but Rio responds that it was nothing special, and that if Abel wishes to thank him, he can simply pay for a meal. At that moment, Abel's girlfriend runs to him, clearly worried. Abel apologizes for causing her such concern. Meanwhile, Luen is unconscious, so unfortunately she was unable to witness Rio's incredible fight. Shortly after, Arthur introduces himself to Rio. He says he is a counselor for the Royal Mages Department and offers his thanks for what Rio has done. Rio responds that it was nothing, but laments that he did not arrive in time to save the others, observing that there were many casualties. Abel then asks Rio for help in collecting the demon's magic stones, as he intends to deliver them to the families of those who died. Rio finds the idea fair, but soon notices something. He asks if those things were truly demons. Abel explains that although they had never seen one before, everything indicates they were demons, creatures that had not appeared in the central provinces for hundreds of years. This reminds Rio that Leonor introduced herself as an Akuma, so a doubt arises as to what the difference is between an Akuma and a demon. Abel asks if Rio is alright. Rio explains that when he was on level 39, he felt a sort of barrier, but now he no longer feels anything. The others believe the barrier disappeared because the demon prince was defeated, and Rio decides to accept this explanation for the time being. Nevertheless, he comments that he noticed something strange with his search magic on level 39 near the stairs, so he intends to go investigate the site. Before ascending, however, they notice something curious. The magic stones of the demons are black. This surprises the group because, according to Rio, the temples of the central provinces have no records of black demon magic stones. Arthur comments that, as far as he knows, demons appear suddenly and randomly. Because of this, many believe they might use some type of space-time magic. Rio contemplates this idea of appearing randomly. Meanwhile, in another location, a group of knights stands before an altar. Behind them, a portal opens, and Leonor appears from within. The leader of the adventurers orders her to step back, calling her the Dark Lord and saying that the altar cost many sacrifices to prepare. Leonor asks if he just called her the Demon King. One of the adventurers explains that it is common knowledge that by lighting the fire on that altar, it is possible to summon the Demon King. Leonor then asks what a group of humans is doing trying to summon the Demon King. At that moment, a blonde adventurer introduces himself. He says his name is Roma, the hero, and declares that he will be the one to defeat the Demon King. Leonor begins to laugh. She says that if he truly is a hero, perhaps he will serve to entertain her for a while. But in a single moment, Roma is stabbed. Leonor comments that this was disappointing, and I personally believe I would be a better hero. She positions herself behind the other adventurers and says they may attack her if they wish, but if they do, she will counterattack. So she recommends that, instead, they save that fake hero. Shortly after, she looks at a sacred gem on the altar. Even if the fight was disappointing, the gem will be a great prize. Roma tries to stop her, calling her the Demon Lord. Leonor becomes irritated and orders them to stop calling her that because she is not the leader of the demons. The adventurers say she is lying because she is far too powerful. If she is not the Demon King, they ask what she is. Leonor responds that each may draw their own conclusions, but she comments that if they all work together, perhaps they can defeat the true leader of the demons. She also mentions that there are humans as strong as she is, and then cites Rio, recalling that the fight against him was quite enjoyable. Before leaving, she bids farewell to the adventurers and tells Roma to become much stronger, because for a hero, he is quite pathetic. After all, one does not see heroes every day. Roma cannot believe that there is a human stronger than he is. But Leonor makes it clear that Rio is approximately 10,000 times stronger than he is. After that, she simply departs. Meanwhile, Rio finds the anomaly he had detected with his search magic. Arthur comments that he has never seen anything like it before, so he places the object in a special bag to examine it later. Following this, everyone returns to the surface. Upon seeing the group, Hug scolds Rio, saying that he entered the dungeon without permission. Rio apologizes, but Arthur intervenes and asks Hug not to scold the boy, for if it were not for him, no one would have survived. Hug is confused, but Arthur says he will explain everything in the tent. Before leaving, Hug thanks Rio for whatever it was that he did. Rio is relieved. Later, Hug discovers everything that occurred inside the dungeon, especially regarding the demons. He initially thought that Abel was the one who saved everyone, but Arthur explains that although Abel fought very well, the demon prince nearly killed him. It was Rio who appeared and saved them all. Arthur then asks Hug who this boy is. Hug does not quite know what to say. All he knows is that Rio helped Abel cross the Malefic Mountains. Arthur understands that he is an extraordinary friend of Abel, someone capable of defeating a demon prince and his entire army. They ought to have the kingdom formally thank a mage as extraordinary as Rio. But there is a problem. If the aristocrats attempt to approach Rio, it could end very badly. Therefore, they decide there will be no official records regarding what happened in the dungeon. Hug agrees completely. In fact, he has never mentioned Rio in his reports, precisely because Luen does not wish to become their enemy either. Some time later, Rio is running with his roommates. They are nearly dying of exhaustion while Rio is perfectly calm, so he comments that they should train more. After all, he is a mage, and yet he is leaving warriors behind in the race. A while later, upon arriving at the city, Rio feels a bit restless. But everything changes when he senses a delicious smell of curry. Without wasting time, he follows the aroma to the restaurant where he ends up finding Sarah. She is surprised that he knows that place, but Rio explains that it was simply the scent of the curry that attracted him. Sarah then reveals that the restaurant has the best curry in Luen, so the two of them order 2 plates. While they talk, Sarah asks where he is living. Rio responds that he is staying at the guild residence. This impresses Sarah because those who live there are normally novice adventurers, and in order to enter the north wing of the library, it is necessary to be at least rank D. Rio explains that this was exactly the rank he received when he registered. Sarah comments that this is impressive. After eating curry and exchanging some flirtations, Rio asks a question before leaving. He asks if she wants to marry him. I am joking, everyone, let us not skip steps. He wants to know why he has never seen her at the guild, since she is supposedly an adventurer. Sarah explains that this is because she has a contract as a fencing instructor for the Count's Knights. She also comments that he is much stronger than he appears. Rio ends up feeling a bit awkward and Sarah, without wasting time, proposes that they train together someday, but of course, only if he has free time. And since Rio is no fool, he does not intend to let this opportunity pass. Later, they meet at the Colosseum to train. Sarah comments that when he entered the restaurant he seemed frustrated, as if his last fight had not been enough to satisfy him. Rio responds that it is surprising she noticed that. Sarah then warns him to prepare himself and to go on the attack immediately. Rio reacts quickly and manages to dodge all the attacks, while the people at the Colosseum are impressed. Excited, Sarah says he is truly incredible, for none of the knights can dodge her strikes. But now she decides to fight seriously and attacks again. Rio manages to block all the blows. However, Sarah's speed increases more and more until, finally, Rio's sword breaks and he then surrenders. But Sarah embraces him excitedly, saying he is impressive, for even while wearing wind clothing he managed to defend himself very well. She asks how he managed to do that. Rio responds that everything he knows was taught by his mentor, the same one who gave him that outfit. Sarah is surprised to discover that the Fairy King was the one who taught him to fight. But Rio asks how she knew the outfit came from the Fairy King, since she mentioned the same thing when they first met. Sarah explains that this is because elves are part fairy, so it is almost a type of racial intuition, and also comments that the Fairy King must like Rio very much since he gave him that outfit. But she had not expected that he had also taught Rio how to fight. Rio asks if that is something strange. Sarah responds that, in truth, the Fairy King is almost a legend. At that moment, they are interrupted by a girl. She informs Sarah that it is time for the young master Alfonso's lesson. Sarah apologizes to Rio, saying that duty calls. Before departing, she tells the maid named Ryalita that the boy beside her is named Rio and is an adventurer. Sarah also comments that she holds him in high regard, so she asks Ryalita to accompany him to his home. Ryalita is surprised, while Sarah leaves excitedly. Sometime later, while Ryalita escorts Rio, she is impressed, thinking about how much Lady Sarah seems to like him. On the way, they encounter Hug. Hug asks Rio to get into the carriage, as they need to talk. And since Rio was already heading to the residence, the ride ends up being perfect. Inside the carriage, Hug thanks him for everything Rio did, but also explains that he cannot simply ignore the fact that he disobeyed a knight by entering the dungeon without permission, as if saving everyone were not enough. Therefore, As a form of punishment, he is going to give him a mission. Rio has never performed a job outside of Luen, so now he will have to go on a short journey. He must meet some merchants and then return. His destination will be Nash. Some time later, Rio is in his room. When his roommates ask for his help, one of them, named Nils, explains that his home village, Voli, has sent a request for assistance. He would like to accept the mission, but a rank D adventurer is required. His other friends rose to rank E thanks to the Grand Tide, but that is still not enough. For this reason, they need Rio to form a temporary group with them to accept the mission. The problem is that a large group of goblins and skeletons has appeared in the region. A very strange combination, because normally these creatures do not live in the same places. Rio smiles upon hearing this. He thinks that the classic enemies of any video game, goblins and skeletons, have finally appeared. Excited, he tells his friends that he will definitely help them. Later, when they meet with the guild master, he asks if they are aware that the request came from Kyladi. Nils responds that yes, they know. The mission was sent to Luen because the adventurers there were unable to complete it. Hug explains that 2 groups have already been sent, the first of rank E and the second of rank D. Even so, neither managed to finish the mission. The young men are surprised because a rank D group should be capable of resolving it. But Hug explains that from what they know, the rank D group could not do anything simply because the villagers rejected them and did not want to collaborate. Nils finds this impossible because his village is not like that, although he admits they are also not exactly very friendly. In any case, it is not the time to jump to conclusions. Hug approves their decision but also warns them to take great care. Still, considering that Ed is in the group a good priest, they should not have many problems. And of course, with Rio on the team, he has no reason to worry. Furthermore, the mission to Nash will still be a few days away, so there is no problem with Rio going with them first. Thus, the group sets out on their journey. After a day of travel, they finally arrive at the village. They feel that the trip was extremely fast, likely because their training is yielding results. When the villagers see Nils, they greet him with joy. Rio then jokes, saying it is good to know that he was not expelled from his own village. Nils asks why he would be expelled. Rio responds that he has the exact stereotype of someone who led a group of troublemakers. Nils remains silent because he cannot deny that he was a bit mischievous. He then asks Rio to stop teasing him and suggests they go find the mayor. When they reach him, the man runs and embraces him excitedly. He comments that Nils has grown a lot and is no longer the little rascal he was as a child. The others begin to laugh because Rio hit the mark exactly. The mayor, whose name is Boland, asks who the other young men are. Nils then introduces them. Some time later, they explain the reason they are there. Nils asks the mayor if it is true that the rank D group said the village did not want to cooperate with them. Boland explains that it all began when they saw goblins for the first time in the South Forest. Shortly after, skeletons appeared in the East Forest. When they perceived the danger approaching the village, they asked for help to eliminate them. The problem is that the first group of adventurers took the battle to a place where they should not have, the depths of the East Forest. They spilled much blood inside the forest. And because of that, when the second group arrived, some villagers wanted to expel them. The adventurers were irritated because they were risking their lives, and many did not appreciate receiving orders regarding where they should fight. However, there is a reason for this. For generations, the inhabitants of that village have avoided that place. Nils understands why the adventurers were not well received after spilling blood in that location. But his friends are somewhat confused. Nils explains that he cannot reveal anything at that moment because those woods hold the village secrets. If he wishes to disclose anything, he must first consult the village elder. Later that night, they are at Nils's house talking to his younger sibling. The children tell the young men that Nils cared for them after their parents died, and that upon turning 18, he decided to become an adventurer. At that moment, Nils appears, informing them that after speaking with the village council, they have been permitted to continue the mission, and that the entire truth be revealed. However, he warns that certain things cannot leave that place, and the young men understand. Then, Nils explains that his village has 2 particularities. The first is that the village's guardian beast lives in the East Forest. Rio becomes excited upon hearing about a guardian beast. More and more, it feels like a fantasy video game, as if reincarnation were not enough for him to know this. Nils continues explaining that only the mayor and the elder may meet with the guardian beast. But Rio practically ignores this part as he begins to devise a theory. He thinks that perhaps the guardian beast has gone mad, or has been possessed by a demon. because if that is the case, he will be able to defeat it. But Nils quickly cuts off his imagination, asking what sort of things he is thinking. Rio pretends it was nothing and asks Nils to explain the second particularity of the village. Nils responds that it is the temple, but explains that the elder will be the one to tell them more about it. Therefore, they must wait until the following day. On the next day, Luen takes the young men to the location where the goblins were spotted. There, they find the creature's footprints. Quickly, Rio detects the presence of 10 goblins. The young men act immediately. They defeat all the goblins except for one, which will be used to lead them to the group's hideout. In this way, they will be able to eliminate everyone at once. When they put the plan into practice, Rio freezes the goblins with great ease. After eliminating those who were frozen, they pursue the last one. The goblin ends up leading the group to a cave filled with goblins, but Rio once again freezes them all without difficulty, and the young men finish off the rest. Suddenly, from within the cave, a goblin general emerges. The young men become nervous, wondering if he will be as strong as those from the Grand Tide. They panic, thinking they will not be able to defeat him. But Rio simply immobilizes them with chains of ice, and Nils delivers the final blow. After this, the young men return cheering excitedly, as they manage to obtain the magic stone of a goblin general. Upon returning to the village, Boland introduces the young men to Lady Nazu, the village elder. She asks them to follow her, and at that moment, Ito notices that she carries a strange gem. Meanwhile, Rio continues thinking only of one thing, that the guardian beast must now appear, likely corrupted, and then they will have a great battle against the final boss. In another scene, the group advances through the forest. Ito asks the elder if that gem is a symbol of the Mother Earth goddess. She confirms this and comments that he must be a rather scholarly priest of light to recognize it. Rio asks what they are talking about. Ito explains that the goddess of light and the goddess of Mother Earth originally belonged to the pantheon of the seven. But with the passing of time, this changed. The elder Nazu comments that now they belong only to the goddess of Mother Earth. Over time, people began to believe that all temples worship only the goddess of light. Because of this, the other 6 deities ended up being forgotten. But in that village, the goddess of Mother Earth has been venerated for generations. Rio asks if this means she cannot use healing magic. The elder responds that she can indeed, but it is not the same type of magic used by the devotees of the goddess of light. For example, Ito needs to recite incantations, but she does not need to do so. And she says she does not understand at what point people began to believe that all magic requires incantations. Finally, the group arrives at the cavern of the guardian beast. Rio becomes excited, thinking that he will finally have his battle against the corrupted final boss. But inside the cavern, a Fenrir appears. The creature gives thanks for their presence. Rio immediately becomes disappointed because he realizes the beast is not corrupted. In other words, there will be no battle. The Fenrir observes the group and introduces himself. His name is Kujin, and he looks at Rio and calls him the water magician, asking how he should address him. Kujin responds that he may simply call him Rio. Boland and the elder are surprised because the guardian beast had never introduced himself before. Kujin explains that his name is difficult for humans to pronounce, but since Rio is present, it would be very rude not to introduce himself. Rio asks why. Kujin responds that Rio is like a kinsman to fairy creatures, and that, to someone like him, Rio's presence is very pleasant. Rio recalls that Sira had said something similar about him pleasing the fairy king. He then begins to wonder if he possesses some characteristic that appeals to fairies. Rio offers his thanks, saying he is happy that his presence is agreeable. However, Kujin begins to laugh and says that, in truth, he is the one who should be grateful, because having Rio there makes him feel as though he will live another 1,000 years. Previously, he believed he had only a few decades of life remaining. But now that has changed. He then addresses the elder Nazu and says that she has brought someone truly extraordinary, but now it is time to continue with the mission. Kujin explains that there are approximately 30 skeletons outside the temple, but inside the temple, there is one that is far more powerful. He is holding that creature inside, but the temple will not hold out much longer. Therefore, he will release the monster as soon as they defeat the 30 skeletons on the outside. Quickly, Ito purifies the souls of the skeletons. After they defeat the enemies, the group opens the temple and is surprised to see that an arch skeleton is inside. At that moment, Rio hands the young men ice hammers. Next, Rio signals to the Fenrir, asking him to release the arch skeleton. Nazu and Boland are impressed by the beauty of Rio's magic. When the arch skeleton exits the temple, Rio freezes the ground, causing the monster to slip. The young men move in to attack, and the skeleton continues to slip repeatedly because of the ice created by Rio. Thanks to this, they manage to defeat it. After the battle, they enter the temple. Nazu comments that she had never entered that place before, but the previous priestess told her that a very brilliant gem used to exist there. However, one day, something strange happened. The gem became disturbed, darkened, and eventually exploded. Now, taking into account what the guardian beast said, perhaps that cavern received an influx of power coming from elsewhere. In recent years, goblins have attacked the village several times. They had never found the origin of these creatures, but now that they have discovered that cavern, perhaps this mysterious energy was generating goblins through the temple. For this reason, Nazu decides to seal the cavern to prevent this energy from continuing to flow and creating more goblins. Afterward, everyone bids farewell, and the young men begin the return journey. During the way, they comment that it has been nearly 300 days since they registered as adventurers. This means that they will soon no longer be able to continue living at the guild residence. They then tell Amon and Rio that they are thinking of renting a house and would like the two of them to live with them. Amon loves the idea, but Rio asks for time to think, as he still has many things on his mind, things that we know involve women. Meanwhile, in another location, Abel asks Hug why he wants him to go in his place to the Uishinashi Open Port Festival. Hug responds that he would normally send Phelps, but he is busy, so he needs Abel to substitute for him. Abel only sighs. In another scene, we see a massive coliseum where a battle is taking place. The general in command interrupts the combat, announcing that the commander-in-chief wishes to say a few words. Then, a woman with red hair appears. She congratulates the army, saying they have improved significantly, but asserts that they have still not reached the required level. Therefore, they must continue training. By order of the emperor, she and the lieutenant must depart the following day for Uishinashi, in the kingdom of Night Glade. They will be away from the empire for 2 months. She hopes that when they return, the soldiers will have improved greatly. After they leave, she comments to the lieutenant that he was very kind, because when the 3rd platoon did something similar in combat, she simply shot them in the leg. The lieutenant responds that they spent a long time with the healers, which ended up delaying the training. The commander comments that it is normal for everyone to be nervous. After all, she is not called Hell for nothing. Meanwhile, Rio begins his own journey. He discovers that he will be on the same mission as his friends, who have formed a group called Room 10. The journey will be quite long, approximately 9 days, but rest assured, for us it will be very quick. After resting in another scene, the young men finally arrive at Uishinashi, just in time for the Open Port Festival, which occurs every 5 years. At night, the mission contractor informs them that they will stay in the city for 9 days. On the 10th day, they will return to Luen. Until then, they are free to do as they wish, and the young men waste no time exploring the local gastronomy. They try squid, octopus, croquettes, and French fries. Rio delights in the food. On the following day, Inferno receives information that one of the carriages from the Kufaris monarchy had issues with documentation. Therefore, they must wait in line before entering the city. In other words, they are stuck there for the time being. A subordinate asks what he thinks of that journey, but Inferno says he has no idea. He is in no position to question the Emperor's decisions. But one thing is certain, he highly doubts they were sent merely to appreciate the sea. Most likely, the Emperor wants them to perform some dirty work, especially since Princess Fiona will not be present. She is the Emperor's youngest daughter and possesses enormous magical power, so much so that she became the commander of the Empire's magic unit at the age of 17. Furthermore, she is extremely beautiful. The Emperor loves her dearly, both for being his youngest daughter and for her power. Perhaps that is why he wishes to prevent her from seeing the Empire's cruelest side. The subordinate does not quite understand, so Inferno explains that they may have been sent to eliminate nobles who oppose the imperial family. Both find this idea quite terrifying, but Inferno makes it clear that he is there only to protect the commander, and that is exactly what he will do. Meanwhile, in another location, Princess Fiona, who, besides sharing a name with Shrek's wife, is also a commander, is at a party for nobles. She appears extremely tired, as she detests this type of event. Her brother, upon noticing this, suggests that she go rest. She seizes the opportunity. When she reaches her room, her assistant Mary asks her to maintain her posture, but Fiona responds that she is very grateful to her brother Conrad for allowing her to withdraw. She hates this type of social gathering and feels much more comfortable in her work as a commander on the training grounds. On the next day, a large carnival takes place in the streets of Uishinashi. The young men enjoy themselves greatly. Ryo notices that Abel is in one of the booths reserved for special guests. Nils notes that the red-haired woman beside him is extremely beautiful, so Ito explains that she is an imperial princess. Therefore, it is better not to even think about approaching her, because she is far beyond their reach. At that moment, Abel's group meets Ryo and his friends. They explain that the guild master asked Abel to represent him at that event, but the guild master himself will arrive the following day. After that, Abel will be free. Then, Luen notices something strange. The booths are protected by a type of wind shield. Ito is surprised, as he thought it was merely a common protection spell. But Luen explains that, according to rumors, the ruling family of Uishinashi possesses an artifact capable of creating a wind shield. However, it is almost never used, as it consumes an absurd amount of mana. Even so, they need to utilize it at that moment. After all, with the imperial family present, any terrorist attack could start a war, so it is better to be safe. Luen also comments that the commander needs to be there without her escort, who is the lieutenant of the magic unit. Ryo asks whom they are talking about, and Luen responds that they are speaking of the pride of the empire, the Mage Inferno. They say he incinerated 1,000 imperial soldiers with just one spell, and that he made an entire city disappear from the map with a single summons. No one knows if these rumors are truly true, but if they are, they prefer not to get involved with someone like that. They doubt Ryo would have any problem with him, but even so, they recommend that he be careful. Afterward, everyone bids farewell to continue enjoying the festival. Ryo also decides to keep enjoying the event, but as soon as he begins to walk, he bumps right into Inferno. It is a coincidence, and the chances of it happening were minimal. Both move quickly and apologize to each other, and after that, they go their separate ways. Some time later, Inferno appears carrying an enormous amount of food. His assistant reminds him that they need to buy a little of everything because Princess Fiona wants to try all the festival foods, and if he does not bring what she requested, she might cause a major scene. They definitely do not want the princess crying in the line at the stalls. Poor Inferno complains, saying he hates crowds. Furthermore, his assistant Jujin is extremely meticulous. Meanwhile, Abel meets Prince Conrad. The prince quickly realizes that he is the representative of the Loom Guild. Abel explains that Abel is his current name. Conrad apologizes, saying he remembered an old acquaintance. Abel responds that it is just a coincidence, but comments that he saw someone very interesting in the booth. Princess Fiona, the commander of the magic unit. And if she is there, then her lieutenant is likely there as well. It is Baron Oscar Luska, also known as Inferno. Conrad responds that this involves military matters of which he cannot speak. He then apologizes to Abel, as a noble he wished to converse with has just arrived. Meanwhile, Princess Fiona prepares to eat. At that moment, Jujin and Inferno enter the room. Inferno immediately comments that he hates crowds. His assistant says that he nearly bumped into a young man earlier, but managed to swerve quickly. However, Inferno responds that it was actually the young man who reacted first, which is surprising considering he appeared to be only an ordinary mage. After that, Inferno uses fire magic to heat the food. That type of magic would be very useful to me, because it is as if he were a human microwave. Meanwhile, the young men continue enjoying the festival. During one of the attractions, the girl demonstrates great skill with a bow and arrow. Ito also participates, showing that both were truly born to use a bow. At that moment, Abel appears and begins to tease them, saying that it reminds him of his past. Ryo then challenges him to show his own skills. After some insisting, Abel accepts. He fires and hits the target perfectly, leaving everyone impressed. But shortly after, Rhea appears, and Abel immediately panics. Little Luen runs to spread the gossip to the group. She reveals that Abel had promised to accompany Rhea's shopping, but never showed up. Now she is furious, so she drags Abel away by force, taking him against his will. Meanwhile, back in the city of Loom, in the Great Library, Syrah is searching for Ryo everywhere. Since she cannot find him, she goes to the Adventurers Guild to ask about him. There, Nina explains that Ryo is on a mission. Syrah says that she will return the following day. But Nina interrupts and warns that Ryo's mission is long. It will take a few days for him to return. Upon hearing this, Syrah becomes completely discouraged. She cannot bear to be away from her love. With nothing left to do, she leaves feeling utterly depressed. Meanwhile, Ryo and Ito observe Nils and Amon participating in a race for adventurers. But it turns out that Dan is also there, the same idiot who used to bully them. Rio notices that the girl he had previously saved is on Dan's team. When the race begins, the young men row desperately, but on the way back, they break their own oars. Then they steal oars from other competitors and begin to fight in the middle of the race. The result is that, instead of completing the race, they finish in last place for acting like complete idiots. Even so, they receive a special prize because they were the ones who most entertained the public. Some time later, they meet with Hug. There, they admire a massive, extremely modern ship. The young men ask how it works. Hug explains the mechanism, but to be honest, they still understand absolutely nothing, and it is normal for them to be impressed. After all, this ship cost approximately 370 million florins. After that, they go to a weapons shop because Ito wants to buy something to help his friends from a distance. The salesman introduces himself and says he has exactly what he needs. He then shows a repeating crossbow. It does not have much range, but it possesses a very high rate of fire. Ito buys the weapon and is immediately thrilled. Afterward, they all go to eat again, until at one point some voices begin to ask who is the only one still missing. Someone responds, the guild master, and they conclude that tonight they will put the plan into action. At night, Abel meets with Conrad, who announces to him that Guild Master Hug had to return to Luen, so he is once again acting as the representative. At that moment, Fiona appears, and Conrad introduces her as the 11th Imperial Princess, Fiona Ruben Bornazewski. Afterward, they bid farewell, while Abel feels that not having a weapon makes him very nervous, although seeing the protective shield in the sky makes him feel a bit more relieved. However, we see on the other hand that the artifact keeping the shield active begins to fail and stops channeling mana. Quickly, the shield disappears and those responsible for it are knocked unconscious. In turn, Fiona notices that the shield has vanished, and after an instant, a massive explosion occurs. Changing scenes, we see a small village. Inside it, a small red-haired boy is lighting the fire of a forge. Then, he asks his master to allow him to participate, and he accepts. The boy begins to strike the steel with a hammer, but tires quickly. Even so, he praises his master, saying that he spends almost the entire day at the forge and does not get tired. After that, he joins his father, who asks him to help his mother with the food. The boy then runs quickly to light the fire, and his name is Oscar. Some time later, in the forge, Oscar is with his master when suddenly his father arrives, surprised to see that the swords are already finished, and asks if Oscar contributed in any way. The blacksmith explains to him that with Oscar there controlling the fire, his work becomes much more efficient. For this very reason, he created a sword specifically for him. Since Oscar is 6 years old and about to turn 7, he is certain that this sword will be of great help. Sometime later, in the forest, all the villagers are hunting. They congratulate Oscar since he showed no fear, despite it being his first hunt. At night, everyone celebrates with a great banquet. While everyone is celebrating, Oscar's father, named Wesley, receives information that bandits have been sighted and that they seem to be preparing to attack. The problem is that there are many of them and perhaps, within a few days, they will attack the village, which would not allow enough time for them to escape. Even so, fleeing is also not an option, because that is their home. Sometime later, the men of the village prepare to repel the bandits, and when they arrive, the village quickly initiates the attack. Wesley tells his son that he must look after his mother while he goes to lead the attack along with Razin. However, some time later, the leader of the bandits begins to move and ends up entering the village with great ease, defeating everyone he encounters along the way. The women of the village remain alert inside their houses, while the leader of the bandits opens the village entrance, allowing all his men to invade and destroy the place. The leader of the bandits reaches Oscar's house, where his mother does not intend to let him advance. However, he defeats her with great ease and takes her life in front of her own son. Oscar, blinded by rage, attacks him using his fire and charges against him. However, the bandit blocks the attack easily and tells him that although the sword is good, he is still too small to use it. At that moment, Wesley arrives home, and upon seeing his wife lying on the floor, he charges at the bandit, but he easily dodges his attacks. He leaves the house and begins to provoke him, causing Wesley to go after him. During the pursuit, Wesley is hit by several arrows and then pierced by a sword. All of this occurs before Oscar's eyes. The bandit then takes Oscar's father's sword and is impressed by the excellent quality of the weapon. However, at that moment, one of his companions calls him, warning that they need to leave because the smell of blood is attracting creatures. Upon hearing the howls, the bandits quickly flee the scene, and a pack of wolves invades the village. devouring everyone they find. Oscar's master runs desperately in search of him and is horrified to see that the boy's parents are dead. He warns that they need to leave that place, but Oscar, crying, responds that his father and mother have died and that he also wants to go with them. However, his master responds that this is not possible, because that is not what his parents would have wanted for him. At that moment, they are quickly surrounded by a pack, and then his master orders Oscar to run to the river, because wolves do not like water. While he stays behind to buy time, Oscar flees desperately toward the river, but some wolves charge at him. Luckily, he manages to dodge them, although he ends up falling into the water and being dragged away by the strong current. When he wakes up, he finds himself in a luxurious house, where a bearded old man asks him not to strain himself. The man says that some villagers found him on the riverbank and introduces himself as Lute Rodok, a retiree whom he can simply call Old Man. Oscar then introduces himself and ends up in tears remembering everything that happened. Some time later, the old man tells him the legend about red hair, a sign that demonstrates the god of fire holds them in high esteem. They say that those born with this hair possess the blessing of the god of fire. Upon seeing him, the old man remembered many things and believes that perhaps their meeting is the work of destiny. Oscar asks if, now that he has nowhere to go, he could stay with him. The old man responds that if he remains in that mansion, he will receive an excellent education. Excited, Oscar decides to stay and asks that he please also be taught how to use the sword, as he wants to become much stronger. Thus, the years passed until a tragedy occurred. The great mansion was completely consumed by a fire. Upon entering the premises, Oscar is surprised to realize that it is the same man who had killed his parents. Furious, he charges at him, but can do nothing. The bandit then says the same thing he had said on that previous occasion. He is still too small to wield a sword. Just as before, his companion Bascona warns him that they must leave immediately, which ultimately allows Oscar to remain alive. The following day, he wanders through the woods, gravely injured and near death. However, his hair has now turned white, as the names Bascona and Paka echoed in his mind. Some time later, now in the present, Abel finds himself meeting with the Lord of Uishinashi, who informs him that despite having spoken with the guild master, they intend to implement the same course for adventurers that is applied in Luen. He explains that both hug, and he spoke to share the material and content with the instructor. But now he has an additional proposal. He would like, if possible, for the aspiring instructors to take the course held in Luen, as it would be very useful for them to see firsthand how it is administered, since it is something extremely valuable for ensuring that adventurers can survive when they are still novices. Currently, they are conversing in a room totally isolated thanks to an artifact, so that nothing said there can be heard from the outside. The Lord of Uishinashi believes that all guilds should implement this system, not just in Uishinashi. Therefore, he wishes to thank them for their help, as it is the first step toward an expansion. Afterward, Inferno and the rest of his members are eating. Actually, almost all of them, because he prefers to eat when the princess returns, as he does not want to have a full stomach should an emergency occur. His companions say he is very protective of the princess, especially since there is a wind protection field at the party. However, we see that the event is completely chaotic, and a true sea of fire spreads through the location. Prince Conrad is gravely injured, and his sister Fiona quickly approaches to heal him while protecting him with a barrier. However, Conrad asks her to stop because, given the situation, it is better for her to conserve her mana. She understands. After analyzing the area, she asks her brother to hide in a specific location. While in the rest of the mansion, some bandits or assassins carry out a true massacre. Fiona and Conrad manage to take refuge, realizing that if no one has managed to leave the event, it is because every place is surrounded. Conrad asks Fiona to contact their soldiers, and she responds that she can do so. But in doing so, she will reveal their position. Conrad says she must do it anyway, because they will end up in a much worse situation regardless if they do not. Inferno and the rest of the members, upon seeing the signal, run quickly to reunite with the princess. Meanwhile, Rio looks at the sky and wonders if those are fireworks. In turn, Fiona is certain that her master will be able to see that signal. Her brother then asks if she is speaking of Oscar, because if so, he is absolutely certain that he will be able to get them out of that situation. At that moment, they are spotted by the bandits, who understand that their objectives are precisely them, and therefore will show no compassion. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Oscar and his team arrive quickly and eliminate everyone with ease. Then they head to the garden. Conrad and Fiona face some assassins and manage to defeat them thanks to the combination of fire and earth. However, suddenly Conrad notices a voice in the air and, upon noting the spell being invoked, speaks desperately to his sister to protect them with the closed sanctuary. Fiona manages to protect them at the last instant, avoiding a powerful attack that devastates everything around them. The problem is that she is left completely without energy. Conrad then realizes that another spell is being prepared and begins to wonder where it is coming from. Oscar arrives at the garden and orders his men to search immediately for the princess. Meanwhile, Conrad tries to discover what type of spell is being used, assuming it must involve earth and explosions. Suddenly, looking at her brother's feet, Fiona notices something strange and pushes him quickly, being the one to receive the attack directly. Their soldiers see a massive explosion, and Oscar, upon seeing the princess being launched through the sky, falls into a panic, remembering all the tragedies he has already lived through. Even from a distance, he manages to read the princess's lips, as she asks him to protect her brother. Oscar then orders his men to protect Conrad, while he himself goes after the princess. Meanwhile, on the seashore, the young men are waiting for Rio and wondering why he is taking so long, since they were supposed to buy several things to share among everyone later. But precisely at that moment, they see the explosion that launched Fiona through the air and run quickly to help her. Nils manages to catch her in mid-air. However, some assassins soon go after them. Ito and Ammon manage to neutralize them, realizing that something very strange is happening in that place, and that it is best now to take the princess to a safe location. However, at that moment, Oscar arrives at the scene. Ito stands in front, thinking that he is the aggressor. But Oscar, furious, orders the young men to get their filthy hands off the princess. On the other hand, Abel, upon leaving the meeting, panics at the sight of the disaster. When he sees Conrad, he worries immediately. Meanwhile, Rio wonders why there were fireworks, since as far as he knows, gunpowder does not yet exist in that world. While thinking about this, he ends up stumbling upon some hooded figures and begins to suspect that something very strange is happening. Back at the beach, Inferno addresses the young men furiously, accusing them of kidnapping the princess. Ito acts quickly, using a sanctuary and managing to block the attack, although this consumes a large part of his mana. Inferno again demands they hand over the princess, but the young men refuse, as they believe he is the one responsible for the state she is in. With no intention of listening to them, he attacks again. Ito tries to protect the group once more, but this time he cannot withstand the attack and ends up fainting. Oscar then advances against them again to finally send them to the other world. However, at that exact moment, Rio appears and blocks the attack. Seeing his friends gravely injured, he looks furiously at Oscar, asking what he thinks he is doing to his friends. Oscar, extremely arrogant, tells him to shut up and take his filthy hands off the princess. He attacks them again, but Rio blocks it once more. Realizing Rio has no intention of getting out of the way, Oscar decides to finish him first. Rio blocks Oscar's attacks using an ice wall multiplied by 10. Oscar then launches an unbridled fire attack. However, Rio comes out practically unscathed, impressing Oscar, who considers it impossible. Rio asks if that is all he has, because if so, now it is his turn. He then advances against Oscar with ice stakes. Oscar manages to defend himself by creating a massive fire vortex. But when the attack dissipates and Rio charges at him again, emerging from a water sphere, Oscar manages to dodge while attacking from a distance. However, Rio slides over the ice and advances with his sword. When their swords clash, the two pull apart and exchange looks full of hatred. And just before they kill each other, Abel appears, trying to interrupt the combat. However, Rio stares with great seriousness, saying he had better not interfere if he doesn't want to end up frozen as well. Poor Abel gets completely nervous, but even so, he asks for just a moment to explain the whole situation. He introduces himself to Oscar and explains that he is the representative of the guild master in Luen, and that the 4 people before him are not the attackers, but rather adventurers who have nothing to do with the attack on the mansion. Still, he understands that Oscar might think they are enemies since the princess is with them. Oscar observes the situation. However, Rio warns that if Abel has said everything he has to say, he had better get out of the way, because now he is going to kill that guy, as he doesn't intend to let him go after he attacked his friends. Upon hearing this declaration, Oscar gets furious and charges with everything he's got. However, Rio neutralizes him very easily with a single blow, and then he stares at him fixedly, saying he isn't bad for a human, but that is his limit. Next, he warns Abel that he is now going to finish him off. Abel then screams, calling him an idiot, saying that if he does that, he will end up provoking a war. And I agree with Abel, very idiotic indeed. Then he addresses Oscar and states that he is acting recklessly, as he has just come from the mansion and Prince Conrad sent him to protect Princess Fiona. His orders are to protect her and investigate the situation. Therefore, engaging in a meaningless duel helps no one. I think Abel should be the hero. Oscar feels a bit embarrassed, but Rio remains irritated. Abel asks him to calm down, saying he understands his anger, but he doesn't want him to provoke a war. Rio asks if Abel would also stay calm if someone attacked Ria. Abel responds that yes, because he is sure Ria would not want him to trigger a war because of it. Rio says it's very easy to talk, and then launches an attack with his magic. However, Abel does not move out of the way and ends up taking the attack directly. Seeing this, Oscar sheathes his sword, while Rio asks Abel why he didn't move. Abel responds that he refuses to provoke a war because of Rio, and if he has to die to prevent it, then so be it. Seeing his determination, Rio calms down a bit and asks him to take care of the princess. After that, he leaves to clear his head. Reaching the seashore, he remembers the moment he met Abel, and after taking a deep breath, he begins to feel more at ease. A few days later, he is happy to see that his friends are doing well, safe and sound after Ria healed their wounds. At that moment, Abel appears, telling Rio that he has put him in a lot of trouble. However, fortunately, there will be no retaliation because after explaining the entire situation to Princess Fiona and Prince Conrad, they understood what happened. In fact, Oscar even apologized, so everything that occurred that night will be treated as a misunderstanding. The good side is that they came out relatively unscathed, as there were many casualties at the mansion. Because of this, turbulent times are approaching in the field of diplomacy. Rio then teases him, saying it is actually his fault because he was there and did nothing to prevent the situation. Abel defends himself, saying he was elsewhere, and by the time he came out, everything was already a disaster. Even so, he informs the young men that Princess Fiona wants to reward them for protecting her from the fall and for risking their lives for her. With the exception of Rio, she does not intend to give him anything. Rio responds that he doesn't care, because it was enough just to have faced that stupid, decadent fire mage. Abel then comments that it is impressive to speak that way about the Inferno mage himself. Some time later, while walking through the streets, the boys get excited because they have finally finished their escort mission. However, Abel explains that no, the mission only ends when they return safely to Luen, so the time comes to head back. After that, at the Royal Library, Syrah feels quite depressed because it has been a long time since she saw her dear one. She doesn't understand why she feels this way, since she only met Rio a month ago. But when she arrives at the restaurant and sees that he is there eating, she cheers up immensely and is even happier when he asks her to join him. Later at the library, she takes him to a special section thanks to a special pass she got for him, as normally one needs to be a rank B adventurer to enter that area. Upon arriving, she shows him an alchemy book, which leaves Rio extremely excited. He tries to copy it using magic, but Syrah explains that unfortunately, the transcription spell won't work. He asks what she means, and she explains that while there is a spell that practically allows for copy and paste, since that book was made with sheepskin, the spell doesn't function on it. Rio has no idea about this, so he decides to copy it the traditional way, writing everything by hand. During the conversation, he comments that she spends a lot of time in the library and asks if it isn't very expensive to have access to it. A bit embarrassed, Syrah responds that she actually pays nothing, because the Lord of Luen realized that about 90% of the library's income came from her. Therefore, he granted her a special pass, and it was he himself who authorized Rio to enter with her. Rio is impressed and says he even feels envious. Next, he asks her age. Noticing his curiosity, Syrah reveals that she is 200 years old. Rio is surprised and comments that she is too beautiful to be that age, which leaves her even more embarrassed. After that, they go to the transcribers so Rio can understand how the spell works. However, upon leaving the building, they run into Abel, and Rio teases him, saying it's strange to see him working. Abel responds that he actually works a lot and says goodbye. But before he leaves, Rio warns that he needs to speak with him, so they agree to meet later. When Abel leaves, Sura tells Rio that she would like him to be more at ease with her. At first, she thought he acted that way because she is a rank B adventurer, and maybe he was nervous because of it. But after noticing he speaks with great confidence to Abel, she wants him to be like that with her too. She asks him to say they are friends. Rio jokingly responds that yes, they are friends at least for now, which makes her very happy. Some time later, Abel meets with Rio and apologizes for making him wait. Rio reminds him that he has a debt regarding food. Abel had forgotten, but Rio was already waiting for him, so he says he wants to ask for something else. He explains that his companions are moving to a house, but he prefers to live alone, so he needs help finding a large house. It needs to have a garden, as he wants to conduct experiments with magic and alchemy. Abel responds that this might be complicated. Next, we see the two meeting with a real estate agent, who explains that unfortunately, he cannot sell a noble's house to someone who isn't nobility, even if they have enough money. Still, Abel explains exactly what Rio is looking for, and the agent takes it upon himself to find something similar. The only detail is that the property is on the outskirts of the city. He then takes them to the site and shows the property. After taking a good look, Rio immediately announces that he will take it, as it is exactly what he was looking for. Meanwhile, the angel Michael comments that Rio has finally faced the fire mage Inferno, and that, although it was just a childish scuffle at that moment, the conflict between them will escalate even further in the future. In addition, there will also be other problems. Because of this, he understands that Rio's path will be anything but easy. He laments it, as Rio's life will be everything but what he desired, a life of peace and tranquility. Therefore, he hopes that he manages to survive this entire experience. And so the anime ends. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. A kiss.